Hello, everyone. Good morning or good evening if you're stateside. Yeah, sorry for the late start. Yeah, just trying to get myself organised. Sorry about that. I've got a bit of a croaky and sniffly nose, which I've had for 2 days now. So I probably picked something up, but yeah, not feeling too bad. That's what happens when you're in public. Richard, how are you, mate? Good to have you here. And good morning to you from Kiwi land. Deborah, always a pleasure. Yeah, I know it's good evening from you, especially being stateside. And Johnny Wong, how are you, mate? Darkfield Carnivore, good to have you. Scotty, always a pleasure. Yes, remember to put the Q if you're asking a question and do not spam the chat with questions to allow others a chance to get their answers as well. So, yeah, very, very important. As we know, sometimes the curry can waffle on, sometimes that is very true, especially when you're trying to explain something a bit more in detail. Or you have to, because otherwise there's a lack of completeness in the answer, in a sense. Yes, and we need completeness so we can understand on this channel. Norman, yes, morning all. How they hanging, Harry? I haven't asked them. Maybe I should. Hey, gang. Very well. The joystick gets in the way, unfortunately, but they're hanging pretty well. David! Hi, Harry. Could you please make a video to share your opinions and feedbacks about Taurine study leader by Dr. Yon Yada? Never heard of the guy. I'll look, I better capture the name and notepad. Okay. Why? Oops. Okay. Okay, I'll look him up. I can't give you an opinion at this stage; it's impossible. But I'll look him up and find out what he's talking about and stuff like that. Um, Always an interest, and a bit of in touring, so I know what he's talking about, what we're looking at. Okay, I'll look into it, David. Yeah, I've got a couple of videos coming out soon to discuss all sorts of questions, and I'm basically slaying, as you know, this year is sort of the year of the slayer, and I'll be slaying a lot of sacred cows like the omega-3s and iodine and a whole lot of things. I'm going to cover a lot of things this year and just pull things apart. Um, yes, so I think there'll be a few shockers out there that once, yeah, you'll be completely and utterly, what the hell did Harry say? There's going to be some catchy little titles as well that are going to basically make certain people in the low carb community and certain people in the general community extremely annoyed with yours truly. But then when they do watch the video, they will get a new understanding of physiology, which they've never had before, never heard of before, on a number of these subject matters. It's just important that people understand these, the way the body's a system. It's not a bunch of reductionist enzymatic steps. You have to see it as a system, as a complete system interacting, and based on what the inputs are into that system, it adjusts appropriately according to genetic, requirements and the physiology based on what you're actually putting in. Hormones will react in a certain way. A whole lot of things will happen, like the thyroid one that I did recently. It's not a problem with reverse T3. It's a protective mechanism if you're basically not if you're basically doing beta oxidation. You don't need the extra stuff. So there's a whole lot of reasons. Once you realize that, you go, well, why would the body create any extra? There'll be stuff on the testosterone as well that will be quite insightful, and I suspect I'll get a lot of hate mail from certain areas on YouTube, on the YouTubes, that'll explain a lot of things. So it's a lot of things that I've had in the background that I haven't talked about, because I've been focused on a whole lot of other things, dealing with cancer, dealing with the big things that people are concerned about. The stuff on the veganerized community and all that, a bit on the repeat community, which I'll continue on the repeat community. But now I want to slay a whole lot of other important things, because there's a lot of myths out there, probably that were generated in about 12 years ago. Even I was ignorant. I believed a lot of the paleo nonsense back in those days. And what's actually happened is, I've wised up and done deep dives and understood physiology from a systems perspective. And luckily I had that coming from a background which thinks in terms of systems and, engineering in that regard. And it doesn't think in these sort of reductionist ways that people learn physiology, biochemistry and all that. It's easy to be able to parrot a whole lot of enzymatic steps and learn them like that and be able to write them in an exam, but that doesn't give you an insight in understanding how the body works. And when you actually focus and then become tunnel visioned on, these enzymatic processes, you start seeing shadows, it's like you're in Plato's cave and you can only see bits and pieces. You have to step out to see the light and actually see all the pieces working together. Then you get an understanding why things work in a certain way with certain inputs, and why the biochemistry behaves the way it does under certain different physiological inputs and interactions with its food environment and its general environment. Once you have that sort of deeper understanding, then a lot of this sort of stuff just goes away. The nonsense arguments, the reductionist nonsense arguments that the repeat people make. Oh, low carb diets reduce T3. Oh, that's disastrous. No, they're releasing free fatty acids. Beta oxidation doesn't require it. So why would it be? It doesn't require the same level of hormonal activity in the body. And actually, when it's not being used and it's too high in the body, it's actually deleterious, and we know from hyperthyroidism. And that happens to a lot of people who tend to be, sad dieters and diabetics and pre-diabetics. They happen this hyperthyroidism, which causes them a lot of muscle wastage and other health problems. So we know that happens in the SAD community, the SAD diet community. So why would that be a healthy thing to have too much circulating around when you're not using it? It's just ridiculous. It's just a not understand physiology, and in many cases looking at these reductionist research that is looking at what does this do, and then say, oh, if that's low, it's going to affect metabolism. Well, that's carbohydrate metabolism. That's affecting carbohydrate metabolism. It's not affecting beta oxidation, fat metabolism. That works differently. Don't you get it? Ignorant. Once you tell them the information, if they don't get it, then they're morons. I classify them as morons, because it's one thing to be ignorant, and then it's another thing to remain reductionists and ignore the actual physiology, the way it works differently. So, yeah. Anyway, more spanking to be done on this channel in the near future. Anyway, invite wedding deal, buddy. What is the upper limit of protein grams per kilo body weight before it turns into sugar? Nobody's ever done an actual experiment to tell you exactly what. As far as I'm concerned, I've done a number of experiments pushing up to slightly over 4 grams per kilo body weight, and I didn't see much of a bump up. The only time I actually saw a bump up is when I did weightlifting at the same time. But I can tell you it's very hard to eat so much because the body will tell you, will signal, will say, I want this amount. If I'm doing a lot of physical activity, really, strenuous activity, I can tell you I can eat a whole animal. I'm joking, but you know what I mean. But if I'm sedentary, I've been sitting around all day doing nothing, I don't feel hungry. The body's smart. It tells you. And that's why I don't believe in these arbitrary numbers, this per kilo body weight. That's what I've always said. 2 grams to cover all the enzymatic pathways, all the actual, proteins and polypeptides that are being transcripted, that you need the extra aminos. Because remember, you're only using, with eggs, about 48%, more or less, depending on the type of egg, whether it's fried, boiled, poached. It can vary a bit. But anyway, let's say 48, more or less on average, which you use for protein synthesis. The rest is used for other things. It's used to grow, because remember, you still need protein, not only for protein synthesis for the muscles, but you still need protein for the organs. You need for detox. Phase 1 of the detox is pretty much use a whole lot of amino acids. So if you don't have enough protein in your system, you can't detox properly. That's probably why plant-based people struggle so much and are constantly doing detoxes. If they only understood physiology that requires, basically for phase 1, you require that. And for phase 2, some of the sulfurs and choline and stuff like that. So, and certain other micronutrients that are required as well. But when you don't have that understanding of a system and you don't understand the different inputs that are required for certain things to happen, then you've got confusion and you think, well, I need to detox more. It's just ridiculous. But that's the sort of idiocy, because the body has, for as long as it's existed, knows exactly how to detox. It's got organs that do it. So, yeah, it's a ridiculous world we live in, but it sells product. So if you want to sell product, obviously you need to basically create a problem. You want to sell, statins, you want to sell anything. And this goes from both the regular sort of world and the sort of the fringe world or whatever. People are selling product and they want to sell product. But the reality is, most people, if they just consume species-appropriate diet, they'll get all the nutrients they need. Now, there are variations with people with calcium needs because of pastoral genes, and there are people with conversion requirements, so they may need to make slight adjustments to incorporate certain other foods into their diet, like eggs, and a few other things, which are important to be able to get retinol and other things like that, which they can't get sufficient from other, especially the leaner animal foods that you get in the marketplace. So there's a whole lot of nuancing and all that. But we shouldn't basically just turn things upside down just because of those elements. But you have to really push hard. If you want to do a proper experiment, you have to basically give the person as much food, and I've done an N of 1, food, eating and eating and eating and seeing what happens to your blood glucose. And I can tell you, if I get enough calcium, because I do have the calcium genes, and as long as I get enough calcium, my blood sugar still remains within the 4 plus 4.5, sometimes 4.7. It can get up to millimoles, and then it comes down pretty fast. And I'm still doing a bit of physical activity. I'm still walking and doing other things like that. So there is going to be a bit of demand driven. I probably should do an experiment at some stage, completely couch potato, which I find very hard because even when I go on holidays, I can't sit on the beach. I find that boring. I get on a motorbike or a scooter or a bicycle or whatever, even my legs, and go places because I want to see, I want to do. I'm not interested in sitting around. So it's very hard for me to do such an experiment, but I have done it for a couple of hours, just sitting and watching movies and see what happens. And I can tell you it was not much activity was happening. Now, obviously, your activity level will affect how much protein you take in. So if you're somebody who's quite physically active, you'll need more than 2 grams. You may need, 3 grams, 3.5 grams. If you're somebody like, Jonathan, sort of top end elite, you may need up to 4 grams. We know that Cordain, Lauren Cordain, who's, paleo academic, when he actually did research on the sand people, the Bushmen of the Kalahari, now those guys actually have to go out long distances sometimes and capture animals and then bring those heavy animals back over, can take them like 4 hours. I mean, that's like being in a gym for 4 hours because you're carrying massive amount of weight. They are tearing down so much of their own muscles by that physical exertion that they will basically consume up to 4 grams plus per kilo body weight. And that's what he saw. These people just sitting there and just munching away for for hours, just eating and eating and eating because they needed that extra protein. They just went through a massive workout. And so there's going to be differences, and your body will tell you, will be screaming that it wants more. But if you're sitting around, it's not going to ask for more. You're going to be struggling to try and push it down. And it would be stupid to try and push it down because you're going to slow down your gut as well because the body's trying to say, I'm going to slow this down. I can't digest this. I don't need it this fast. So everything works within physiological ranges and changes depending on, this adaptive response to the environment, to what you're doing, your behavior, your activities level and stuff like that. So there's not a fixed level, but I would say the upper limit for most people that can handle, that means, stomach-wise, the stretching of the stomach, they can only get so much, is probably close to 4+ grams per kilo body weight, because even with tribal people, it seems that's as high as they can get as well. They can't get any higher. It's really hard. This is why bodybuilders trying to get higher than that, what they used to do in the old days, they would actually, use a lot of, these milk powders and stuff like that, trying to put more and more. And they were getting, because of the excess protein, they were actually getting like constipated. They had to take laxatives and all sorts of things. So they were doing crazy things to try and get more in that regard. But that was the sort of culture that existed back in those days. And that's where all the egg powders and the milk powders come from, as people trying to get more and more per kilo of body weight in than even they probably needed, and really creating massive gastrointestinal, issues. Now we know that you can eat over quite some period of time and not be as, you can still eat quite a bit per day, but stretch it over, a number of meals in the day over 12 hours, and you can get far more in that way. And at the same time, the body is not put under pressure to try and to process it and pretty much digest it. So there is a limit there in terms of digestible capacity of, otherwise you'll start seeing stuff, indigestible stuff coming out in the feces, So, it's not only if somebody's got malabsorption issues or problems like that, even somebody healthy, they push the envelope too much, the body will just try and get rid of it and all that. It has a certain rate at which it can actually digest and break down and absorb through the small intestine. So, there are limits in that regard, and there are limits and also in the motility, the movement of stuff. You eat more protein, it'll actually stay in your stomach longer, and you'll have slower amounts coming out each time to be absorbed. So it's not the amount. The recent studies, that's what they've shown. I've been saying this for a long time because I've looked at rat studies and other things like that, and I've said, yeah, I think this works in all mammals. And the recent research that came out, I haven't done a video on it since everybody else has done videos on it, so I don't see the point at this point, because it's not saying anything that others are not saying. I like to be unique. I'm just joking, but yeah, in that regard, listen to your body. Is what I'm trying to say. Listen to your body, and it will tell you how much it needs. Good to have you here, Jay. Pat and Pat again. And Todd, how are you, mate? Ah, yes, yes. But you don't need too much, you know. Gibbs free energy is close to neutral, where glycolysis uses more Gibbs free energy. So I wonder which requires more energy. Yes, so even there, it's completely and utterly confused. And actually, there's more methods of producing glucose than you can poke a stick at. Not only gluconeogenesis, there are other enzymatic pathways. There's quite a few, 30 odd. It's crazy the sort of redundancy and capacity that the body has, and how much nonsense most people believe in, unfortunately. Nathan, I'll come back to that. Lukey, how are you, mate? Yeah, Slayer Harry. He's the best Harry. Yes, he is. He definitely is. Okay, back to Deborah. Jack Cruz tweeted, seed oils aren't a problem. Oh, what? If you live in a warm, sunny place, so can those people get away with it? What you must be kidding me. Really? What's wrong with people? Has everybody lost their mind recently? Everybody's making so many stupid statements. I can understand if somebody comes out and actually makes credible arguments. Jack knows as well as I know that if your whole body is exposed, you've only got something like 19 parts per million per hour of deuterium depletion. But seed oils, industrial seed oils in particular, now obviously if you've got like olive oil or other oils that are basically cold pressed or whatever, even if they're plant oils, they will have lower deuterium. Like most of the actual vegetable oils will have 130 parts per million, which is the top end of the normal, exactly the same as olive oil, avocado oil. What's the other one? You know what I mean. Anyway, so they all are very similar. Coconut oil is slightly different. Palm oil as well is close to that. It's slightly lower because of the saturates, but only slightly. I think it maybe there's variations to it. Just sub 130, but it's just barely. Coconut oil is the only one of the plant oils that is below in the 120 odd, and the reason for that is because um, the plant draws up water from the ground and actually fills up, the sort of the fruit. And what happens is, as the fruit becomes more, it becomes more concentrated. It excretes the water into that middle part. By doing that, it also gets rid of a lot of the deuterium that it's got from the soil. So it's pushed it out, you know. And as a consequence of that, because all plants concentrate deuterium, the method is using water to concentrate it into the fruit. Always, every single plant does that, you know. Um, Humans and other, mammals and stuff like that, they have deuterium depleting methods, which are different, their physiology. But plants, the only way of getting rid of it is forcing it into the fruit. Because the coconut actually can force it into the water like that, it can the actual you could say the fruit part, or the that we actually use for oil and for coconut trimmings or whatever, shredded coconut and stuff like that, the actual coconut part, that actually tends to be very low in moisture, um, and also um, will actually lower its deuterium level by this methodology. There's a few scientific names, I just can't remember them now. But they use terminologies, it's always to baffle people. But generally, that's what happens in the coconut, and that's the only reason it's lower. Now, industrial seed oils are not in the 130 range. Industrial seed oils, which is the majority of what people are being exposed when they go and get fried food in a takeaway joint or whatever, they're beyond the toxic levels of 180 parts per million. They're in the 255, 200 and over. Usually, a lot of them, if they've been, can be up to 255 parts per million. Absolute toxic destroyers of the mitochondria. There is no way, even if you're in the tropics, to lower that level, even if you're out in the sun all day long, if you're using those industrial oils. If you're using the other oils, yes, but then you've got the other problem with the other oils is the rancidity, the aldehydes and stuff like that, the oxidation. So they still will oxidize, and they still will acquire some level of, rancidity, and over time, and also they will have a slightly increasing over time um, levels of aldehydes. And we know that from all these oil experiments, even Pim and Bart actually did a number of experiments and found the same stuff. So I don't buy this nonsense. I can't believe Jack would say something like that. Absolutely, irresponsible. This is the problem with people. They can't accept to be. They end up believing in their own lies and deceptions, and because he's not ignorant. He knows how much parts per million these seed oils have. It's not as if he's not aware of it. So that's very irresponsible on his part. That's my personal opinion, but I believe he's very irresponsible. And the thing is, people are going to take that nonsense and they're going to go to town because, people never do things in small. Oh, Jack said it's okay. So I can get out in the sun more often. If I'm in a sunny day or it's summer, oh, use seed oils. Or I'll go to the takeaway joint. Because even the carbs that have got, are less deleterious if you're out in the sun. Yeah, I can see the diabetic rates in Southeast Asia are going sky high. And they're using palm oil, which is also, the refined stuff is slightly higher than you know, the regular sort of unprocessed, unrefined. But even the refined stuff, which is like our industrial seed oils, which is refined, does have higher deuterium, but not to the levels that you find in the Western industrial seed oils, just a process. So even they are problematic from a deuterium point of view. And still, look at the problems that exist in Southeast Asia, just from sugar, and slightly higher deuterium from sugar and the refined oils. tell you something. It's not, and these people are outdoors all day long. Many of these people that are working. So that's nonsense. I knew a carpenter. He's always outdoors. You know, dark. He's always outdoors. He's getting plenty of sunlight for deterrent depletion. You know, so Ronnie is his name. I mean, he's out there. You know, I used to go and play a bit of snooker with him when I was in Indonesia, and that's what I do. You know, I know these people and I socialise with them. I keep on telling him, you've got to tell your mum to stop putting sugar in your food. They don't listen. They're living the rich life, something they couldn't afford in the past. I can't believe it. Oh, fuck's sake. Jack, bloody hell. That is. He uses convoluted words to baffle people, but then he goes out and says this sort of nonsense. He's lost a lot of respect in my eyes. Let's put it that way. A lot of respect. Are you using any peptides like MOS-C or BPC? No, I've used BPC 157 on Dad. I've used a couple of others on a few other friends, the TA1 for thyroid, people that had thyroiditis for many years, and a few others. And I'm investigating a number of peptides. I don't personally use them myself. Possibly in the future, I will use them myself. The reason why I will use them myself, I just recently got some more peptides for Dad. So I get them from Poland, or there's a UK peptide site and a Polish one. The BPC comes from the American companies actually opened up a factory in Poland, and it's less problematic to get it because of the US ban. So yeah, there's a few of those political issues. This is not an endorsement or any. I'm just telling you what I do in that regard. But yeah, there's a friend, Paul, down here in Tasmania. He's one of my subscribers also, and I chat with him, and he's been doing a lot of different peptides and all that, and he's seen a lot of benefits. I think once you get over 65, you will see a lot of benefits from peptides in that regard. But you have to be very careful not to overdo them as well. Some of these are injectable. I know Paul gets a lot of injectable ones. Got to know you inject in fat cells. You don't inject it around the other part. Make sure that hygiene, clean with alcohol, the site. There's a lot of things, and that's why I can't recommend them, because a lot of them are in injectable form, and I usually say, well, you can go to these sites and get them, but you need to do your own research how to do it and all that. It's just because it's medical advice telling people how to do these sort of things, and that's where the problem is. It's not, I may be investigating them, but I don't promote them, and I think there are people that are out there that are promoting them. And I think irresponsibly in some regards. But I'll leave it at that. But I'm not against them, no. And I have used them on Dad, and some of my friends have used them as well, and acquaintances as well. So anyway, let's move on. What's the cause of sodium retention in our body? High insulin, or eating too much salt? It's not eating too much salt. The body knows how to get rid of it. It's usually high insulin. That's the biggest problem. But also, if you do like what Pim did recently, and I've done in the past, like dry fast for a long period of time, what happens is you end up doing a very high retention of sodium. And so you have to be very careful for what is called the refeeding syndrome. You can actually kill yourself by creating electrolyte imbalances, arrhythmias to your heart, and so you've got to be very careful what you're doing when you're doing that sort of stuff and know what you're doing. So if you haven't practiced these sort of things and you're not well aware of the risks, for instance, as I said to Pim, I don't use broth. I used to, but I don't use it. and I usually warm water because even room temperature water feels like when it's going down my esophagus like ice water. It's really uncomfortable. So usually I'll use things like cream of tartar, just 1 gram. You don't want a lot of potassium because you don't want to cause imbalances. So I'll take that. I'll have some warm milk, and some kefir as I'm coming out of mine. And then usually the next day, I'm back into, like, I'll cut little thin strips and boil them in my deuterium depleted water. I'll boil the actual meat. I'll drink the fluids, and I'll have the small amounts of meat and some raw eggs, and then by the third day I'll get back to regular eating when I do a dry fast. So that's one thing, because that's when your antidiuretic hormone. I have also consumed less salt now because I drink less water, so I've upregulated my antidiuretic hormones and I hold on, and I need less in that regard. So nowadays, a bit of salt is all I need. Too much salt, it's just too much. So there is a lot of differences. You can see it in the tribal people. They walk around. They don't drink much water, bugger all, and they've upregulated their antidiuretic hormones, and that will hold on to minerals, and then the body will just regulate what it needs. In a low insulin state, it will dump what it doesn't need and will keep what it needs, and it's much better sort of physiology. You don't get these ups and downs, which is important. That's why people run to electrolytes and all sorts of things. I haven't taken electrolytes for years, so that should be a lesson to you. And neither do any of the tribal people. Too much water drinking is the problem. Uh, yes, you should hydrate from animal fats. And when you're eating animal fats and you've got stored fats in between, you should be getting enough hydration. And so, my coffee. David, Permuta has described fat in our bodies as an organ. Do you agree with the description as an organ? Well, the adipose tissue is sort of like a storage organ for triglycerides. You could call it that. We just call it, the adipose tissue. And the reason we call it that is because it's storing something. An organ actually does things like an organ. The heart will pump working together with the electrical state of the negative of the vascular tree, and actually move things along. The liver will detox, do all these sort of things. The kidneys will also purify and are involved in some sort of level of cleaning up the blood and detoxing and getting rid of waste products. So all the organs have got, they're doing some job. They're either supporting the immune system or they're supporting certain metabolism in a certain way and all that. Fat cells are more like an energy storage depot. So it's not precise like organ. I'd actually say the brown adipose tissue is more, you could describe it more as an organ than the white adipose tissue. And the reason for that is because the brown adipose tissue has mitochondria, which can uncouple and produce heat. So it can warm you up. So it does actually do something outside just storing. It actually does a function, has a functionality to it. So if I was going to call anything an organ, I'd call the brown adipose tissue, you know, just behind our rib cage, the back of, it's usually behind our major organs, our lungs and everything else. It usually sits behind that sort of area. So I would call that more of an organ than the white adipose tissue, which is more like a depot, a storage place. But, people use, I don't know how does he justify it, Norm? What is he, I'd have to look into it. So I would have to. I know who you're talking about, but I'll look into it and find out. What does he mean by it? Because sometimes people use definitions which, how can I put it, are not really valid. It's just something they've made up. It's what I call being fashionable in our community or in the general nutritional community. People like making terminology up, like insulin resistance and things like that, which is a construct, um, which really is describing, the Randall cycle in a sense. But or peripheral insulin resistance, which really describing a change in, to fat metabolism and, down regulating glucose uptake by the periphery. That's just a normal thing because you want to spare the glucose, which is demand driven, for other biological processes. So even that is sort of a nonsensical term, but it's all these terms which, you know, these labels you could say that people make up for their own reasons. So, you know, I don't think you can call adipose tissue as an organ. Um, does it have some functionality like influencing hormones and secreting certain hormones? Yes, it does, but it's more of a storage place than an actual what we would the classical terminology of an organ. But do I really care? No. If he wants to call it an organ, good luck to him. Uh, I don't get really wound up with those things too much. Don't know, Sarah. Anyway, okay, he's fallen out of the low carb community because he makes. Okay, so he's gone plant based. Well, they either go repeat plant based from their reductionist thinking. They do all sorts. Yeah, I've given up on a lot of these people. They seem to. They can only understand things at the surface. They seem to struggle to go any deeper in their understanding. So anyway, can you explain lean mass hyperresponder in a really simple terms? Is high cholesterol even a problem? Absolutely not. There is variability in lean hyperresponders. So if somebody's very lean, they will be, depending on their genetics, the APOE. So if they're a 4-4, that is, a 4-3, a 4-2, they are likely to, when they're lean, to might have extremely high levels of LDLC because they take up chylomicrons very rapidly. So they've got a lot of receptor sites on the liver, just takes it up, sucks it in. That is the tribal type. That's what Dave Feldman, he's one of the APOE4s as well, and many others. And so they will take, and because if you're consuming sugar at the same time, those people will drive the construct of insulin resistance in the liver much faster than anyone else. Where an APOE 3-3 like myself will uptake chylomicrons, that means fat coming in from the other side of your gut. So that's, I can't remember exactly now, but at a much lower pace because there's less receptor sites for the uptake at the liver. So they'll circulate around the body for much longer. So just think of it. You need 100 trucks 100 trucks to transport all the energy the body requires in a day. Okay? Because remember, you're producing as much ATP as your weight. So if you weigh 70 kilos, you'll produce 70 kilos of ATP in the whole day. Now you have to traffic a lot of energy, glucose and fat, around the body to basically provide that energy for that production of ATP, for beta oxidation, in our case, being low carbers. So if you've got 50 trucks that are basically chylomicrons and 50 trucks that are VLDL, VLDL goes to LD to IDL, intermediate lipoprotein, and then to the sub size lipoproteins of LDL. Now, if you've got APOE2, for instance, and you've got 70 trucks, your amount of those things are circulating around. They're still giving energy to the cells. You're getting energy in to every single cell from the chylomicrons that are staying in resident in the bloodstream for longer and going into cells and providing the energy. And there is less coming out of the liver because there's less being re-exported, repackaged into the red truck. So the blue truck there's more blue trucks circulating around and less because of your genetics. So then somebody is 4-4, the trucks just pile in the blue trucks, and shitloads of red trucks come out, repackaged as triglycerides and just sent around the body in a repackaged format, in a different lipoprotein, a different truck. It's just still energy, but it's in a different truck. Just because it's been demonized wrongly because LP little a, which is a lot LDL, sort of modified LDL, that actually is involved together with LDL is involved because the LDL is also involved in supporting some of the immune functions, and LP little a is involved in reparative, like stitching things up, the damage and all that, putting some calcium in there and trying to hold it all together to allow the healing to happen. The same thing happens on your skin if you get cut, like a skin cut or whatever. So these things come in to repair. Just because they're in the site doing their work, if you hadn't cut yourself or didn't damage yourself or putting in appropriate things, glycating yourself or putting seed oils that are high in aldehydes and ripping the membranes and damaging the membrane, in your arteries and stuff like that, and the lipoproteins, and spilling that sort of out and damaging the LDLs because you've got all this toxic oils inside them, all the aldehydes and primary, secondary oxidative products, they wouldn't be there, at the scene of the crime, so to speak. So if you're basically eating animal foods and you've upregulated your intracellular antioxidant systems and all that, these things don't happen. There is very little injury, and whatever happens, that very little can be dealt with by those intracellular antioxidants that are upregulated in a much lower insulin state. High insulin, though, a lot of those intracellular antioxidant systems are impeded or affected negatively. So you have to think of a system. What is everything doing at the same time? Things adjust based on that. So they're going to be these LDL that are going to come through. They're not going to be highly glycated. They're not going to be highly oxidized. So it doesn't really matter what their numbers are. Their trucks will be determined on the energy requirement of the system. And it will be depending on the genetics, how many are blue or red. That's the difference. Now, these people have got the more older genes, which is the APOE4, which we find in a lot of other species as well, and pretty much the apes are all APO, are 4/4s, more or less. And so because there's very little sugar in the environment and definitely zero industrial seed oils, it's never been a problem for these things to be sucked into the liver, reprocessed and reshipped out. The problem now is we live in a modern environment where we're sucking in a lot of carbohydrates and all that. And so what's happening is our genetics are shifting. There are more people now that are basically got APOE3s in particular, not so many 2s yet. You find them more in Asia, like China and places like that. You know, those people, because they're eating more carbs, they're holding off taking in the those lipids. So you've got more chylomicrons circulating. So it's really, this sort of management of energy based on the body going, oh, we're taking in carbs as well. We need to keep the chylomicrons in the system circulating a bit longer because we don't want to create inflammation in the liver by putting in too much sugar and fat at the same time. Got it? Because that's what modern people do. But in the past, they didn't. That's why there were more APOE 4/4s, and that's why we find them more APOE 4/4s in the tribal populations. That's why the construct of insulin resistance is much higher, and the health outcomes for Australian Aborigines, for Inuit people, for Maasai that go to Nairobi and change their diet and end up getting a hell of a lot sicker than when they're on their ancestral diet. See the difference? So your genetics were fine for a very long time. Then you change your environment and now they're not. They're a problem. And for the others who have been agriculturalists and pastoralists for the last, 10,000 years, they've shifted slightly in the way they manage these energy trucks. And so even when they become leaner, they'll respond differently compared to somebody with an APOE. They'll still respond higher because you're still taking out, you're still out of the, you're trying to repackage and push continuously energy out so that if you're lean, you're going to have less, and you're not eating enough fat, which is the other problem as well, your LDL will go up. But how much it will go up will also, as I said, will depend on those genetics, the APOE genetics. So there is two components to that whole discussion. The hyperresponder, because of lean, has got less body fat on them. They need to repackage, and they'll even repackage part of the actual sugar. If they're eating sugar, they'll repackage it, and you'll get more trigs out at the same time. But most of the people is because they're eating fat. It will actually get pushed out much quicker because that's the only energy available. So there's your difference and why they hyper respond, and you end up with less trigs and more LDLC as a consequence, because those triglycerides shrink very rapidly, and you have much less because it's your primary energy. So if you're shrinking from a VLDL down to an LDL, well, the measurement, you're going to have less trigs left over. And so your triglycerides go down because you've just used them. You've given them around. And you've gone from a VLDL and shrunk it all the way down to an LDL, and you'll end up with more LDL in circulation. And then based on your genetics, it will determine how fast you can actually remove them as well. So one, because you're not using sugar, you're using more fat. So you're going to be circulating more lipoproteins, but then how much will depend on your genetics as well. So it's a two-bit question in a sense. Now, I have done there is a video on APOE. If you check my Pim's, the chats with Pim Johnson, there is a video there that I cover in detail the APOE, and that will provide you with more insights. So no, it's completely, it's a a non-health issue that people have medicalised because, again, statins make a lot of money. Matthew, hey Harry, could you talk about the best type of resistance training exercise that are the best for the human body to support health and longevity? Well, you know, that's not my expertise area. Go to Jonathan. Ask Jonathan. He's really good when it comes to that sort of stuff. My sort of general thing, what I do, and this is not a recommendation to anyone, but what I do is I do some walking. So I'll walk to work, I'll walk back. So I do that. And the type of resistance things is I will go like flat out and do jumping jacks, like until I can't do anymore. I'm nearly falling over. So I'll do that. And I'll do, because that also has two prongs to it. Let me drink a bit of my coffee. So, so you've got the one side of the coin is that you're moving a whole lot of different body parts. It's not just running fast. And I do sometimes a bit like that, like on a bit of a hilly side. I'll just run rapidly at work from the ground floor. I'll go to the 9th floor and I'll jog up. So I can tell you when I get up there, I'm panting. Especially if I jog fast. So that's what I do. Even I'll do that once or twice at work. And in here where I live, there's a hilly side, and I'll basically jog or run up it until I'm basically carked. I've had it. So I'll do that to sort of I'll do sort of high intensity. And in terms of resistance, like bodybuilding type things, I pretty much do once a week, and it's Wednesday. And so after work, I usually try and start early work because I'm working from home. And so I just sign off and then I start doing some weights before I have my later meal, which tends to be about 5 o'clock. So, and if I need to cook something up, I'll just get it going at that moment, and then I'll start doing some weights until failure. And that's the sort of stuff that I do. I don't do anything special. I don't think I haven't seen a tribal person in the gym personally, but I think that you need to do things. My sort of book is you need to do some level of weight bearing exercises. Tribal people kill an animal, carry it for miles. That's weight bearing. They will sprint short distances to get the kill, and they'll walk in a very not jog because that creates left ventricular hypertrophy, not good for the heart. But just walking, which is very low intensity type thing. And it's sort of these combination and just general movements, flexibility movements. I'll do some, hand sort of exercises as well, just for the wrist, work that sort of stuff. And so then you've got a stronger grip. These are the sort of things that I sort of do to strengthen my muscle skeletal sort of structure and get enough protein in. So I do about 2.2 grams. Most of the time I try and get over 2 grams, but close to 2 most of the days. And if I'm on my day that I'm sort of lifting weights, I do about 3 to 3.5 grams for that day. So I really have a big meal after, because we break as we get old. I'm 58 in September, and we break down tissue much quicker when we're older. So we need a bit more protein in that regard. So somebody that's probably younger probably can, if they're just doing lifting weights a couple of times only for those days that they're actually lifting weights, probably 3 grams is is enough for them. If they're doing sort of the level that Jonathan does, like competition level, really high end, where you have to really push, there you may have to go to 3.5 to 4. So it all, your protein intake, your activities level. But I don't think that high end bodybuilding guarantees longevity. But I don't think being a couch potato does either. I think it's somewhere in between. And I think it's naturalistic movements, pushing things, pulling things, flexing the different parts of your body, using the different muscles. Things like that are really important. We sometimes neglect our glutes. So, and I've, some of the Asian ways where you sort of work your glutes and stuff like that. The old traditional way that people used to have, even when they'd sit down, and in the way they would sit down, and all these things. You're trying to move a lot of different muscle groups, a lot of different parts of your body, and parts of your skeleton as well. I'm not that big in just isolated movements and continuous isolated movements. I think that's okay if you want to become a bodybuilder, but if you really want to have a healthy musculoskeletal structure, you've got to move the whole body. Dancing is probably a good thing as well because you're moving the whole body so things like that. Sort of an obstacle course. I have done an obstacle course, so that also can be useful because there you're sort of using your sort of pull-ups, or you're basically going across a wire or a pipe and holding onto it, and there's all sorts of things because you're going to be using a lot of different parts of your body. We have to get into basically movements. In the past, when people worked in factories or worked on the land and all that, they worked a whole lot of different parts of their body continuously. And I think that's the normal way of living. And we don't do enough of it. So I think that if you want, you got to get your mind out of all this, you have to do this or that or whatever. Yeah, it's fine if you want to do competition level certain things. You've got to train for that competition level. But I think for longevity and for health, you really have to move the whole body. If you walk a lot, and I've found that, and you don't, train your glutes as well, you can actually get a lot of pain because you can overtrain the muscles in front of your legs. So that can be a problem as well. So I ended up doing that, and I had to get a rolling pin to sort of exercise my glutes for a period of time, and now I do a whole lot of other exercises to help in that regard. But think the naturalistic movements that people needs to get into, and there are some channels out there that are into sort of naturalistic movements, and I think they have a lot of value for the majority of people because that's how people used to do. I still will go, like there's a shop just up the road here. I'll put a backpack on. I'll go up there, pick up a few things, and bring them back. Walking with my hands and all that. So you've got a bit of weight bearing, a bit the way traditional people used to do. Everybody now just gets in a car and drives 5 minutes. That's ridiculous. When you can just walk, get the stuff, put it in bags or in a backpack and bring it back. And it's what you'd see in Asia, somebody doing, or that sort of area. Because in the past, if I'd get on a scooter and go get, I've taken the battery out. It's just sitting outside. I do very little, in that regard. I try and move more myself rather than actually driving around or things like that. Because a lot of people do too much of that. We're too sedentary, and we think that, I do weight lifts once a week or twice. I go to the gym twice a week, but the rest of the day you're stiff as you're not moving at all. You're just sitting there constantly just on the computer. Your fingers are doing most of the activity. It's not healthy. It really isn't healthy. You've got to move the body. It's really important. This is why, if you look at those farmers and industrial workers, you know, they're built like brick shithouses. They're strong. They've got strong bones, strong muscles. Um, some of these guys are in their 60s and older, and they're doing heavy manual work that most young people would struggle with. That tells you something, that this sort of naturalistic way of, um, that people used to live and work, the physicality of movement, of natural movements. I think that's the thing that we've lost in our modern world. We've got too many creature comforts. We've become, let's say, too comfortable. I think the thing that's going to kill us quicker than anything else, beyond the diet that's bad, is our comfort. We're too comfortable in that regard. I go out sometimes with, I'm going with shorts in winter. I walk, and people say, how can you walk around in shorts? I'm fine. Your body gets used to it, and adapts. Problem is, too many creature comforts are killing us. We need to stress our bodies a bit. It's called hormesis. We need to move. We need to move different parts of our body in order to have flexibility, in order for the ligaments, in order for the tendons, all these sort of stuff. It's not just a bone, your bones and muscles. It's all these ligaments and tendons and all that. They need to, move the frame around, so to speak, and maintain a certain level of flexibility and functionality. And I think that's if you want long life, you really have to move the body around in that regard. I mean, if you're a carnivore and a tradie, it's probably a perfect combination. I'm an office worker and a carnivore, but it's not the best combination. And I have to do certain things, like, as I said, jog up the stairs, or sort of hang off the rails and sort of, deliberately, well, not many people are around, so I don't look idiotic in the office or, in the stairwell or certain places. But I do certain things in order to try and encourage certain naturalistic, things. When people are not looking around, I squat because it's a good thing for your back, for your lower back and your glutes to squat and things like that. In Asia, they squat all the time. In many parts of the world, we traditionally did, and people didn't have lower back pain. We sit too long. All these sort of things. It's all these things that we're failing ourselves with. Anyway, I was just confused about of eating higher protein turns into sugar or repairing tissue. No, protein is still demand driven. The levels that people would have to push where the physiology couldn't handle it anymore, you may get a small bit of extra sugar that may be produced, a small bit, but most of it will actually end up indigestible into the stool. So it's not going to be like a horrendous amount. The only time you actually get a lot of excess gluconeogenesis, and again, it's demand driven. It's really when people are extremely lean. If you're really lean and you don't have enough adipose tissue to provide for beta oxidation, you know what the body's going to do? It's going to turn the only thing that's available that's coming in. It's like that guy where his certain liver enzymes which are involved in gluconeogenesis went up. That, I did the video about, I can't remember what it was called now. It's a while ago. Sias, the doctor, criticising him. The guy was just too lean and eating lean meats and turning it into sugar because there wasn't enough fat in the diet, you know. It's sort of, a mild rabbit starvation. If he continued that, he could potentially get, end up in a state of rabbit starvation. It's just, again, ignorance. Ultra, like 4% fat or whatever. Like Jonathan did competition recently, and Pim had a video on him. That's fine for that sort of performance sort of stuff, but you can't sustain that. Your body's screaming for fat because the right physiology is much higher. It just is what it is. You're still lean, but you're not ultra lean, because ultra lean is unhealthy. What do you think tribal people go out of their way to get more fat? And they actually consider fat, even having a bit of extra layer of fat on top, not being as lean, is actually a healthy thing. And it actually is. They understand that. We've got this bizarre way. I'm not talking about obese now, and I'm not talking about obese or heavily overweight. I'm talking about having just a small little thin where the six pack isn't as visible. Like a lot of the tribal people that have extra fat on it. You're in the 16% or whatever, or even up to 20% is absolutely fine. But the extreme levels are very unhealthy. So yeah, then you will force the body to take those gluconeogenic amino acids and use them to produce more. But that's not because, and it will suppress insulin as well. That's the funny thing is. And a lot of that will go through the GLUT1 receptor rather than the GLUT4. So, yes. And that's why he would say, oh, it's causing insulin suppression. No, you fool. It's higher glucagon to try and furnish enough energy because there's nothing on the skeleton. There's not much. The guy's too lean. So if the guy's too lean and, you've got that situation on the one hand, so you've got a person too lean, and on the other hand, you've got a person who's eating lean meat. So what's the body supposed to do? It's supposed to suppress, keep down, because otherwise you'll have a hypoglycemic shock. The body's not stupid. It's going, okay, we don't have enough body fat to provide enough energy for the body. This idiot isn't eating enough, is eating lean meat, not providing us enough fat to generate ATP through via beta oxidation. Okay, the only way is upregulating glucagon much higher to produce more sugar from the amino acids. Gluconeogenesis, upregulate gluconeogenesis. Okay, that's a demand that's being created. So obviously that is going to generate, if we're going to traffic more because there's no fat in the system, we're going to traffic above the baseline, so we're pushing sugar into the 5s or even 6s millimoles. Now, in a normal, if you're having fat with that, guess what would happen? The Randle cycle would be activated. See how a system works? The body's not stupid. It goes, I can't engage the Randle cycle because I'm going to cause this person hypoglycemia because I'm going to cut off the only energy that's available. He doesn't have fat for beta oxidation. There's only this. So it lowers even further insulin deliberately to allow for more glucose to be trafficked through the system, and sugar does go up. And what does science say? Oh, it's insulin suppression. And he calls himself a doctor? No. It's glucagon doing exactly what it's supposed to do, maintaining the amount of glucose that the body requires and keeping insulin down in order to prevent hypoglycemia in that person who is stupid enough to be eating lean, meats only and being ultra lean as well. Another crazy athlete. Ugh. And that's what you get. The body, even for the idiots, will respond in the smartest way it can. But unfortunately, others think the body's wrong. How dare the body try and keep this person alive and not induce hypoglycemia to them? Oh, now you understand why I get exasperated with all these reductionist crackpots. Because they're likely to kill people or cause them harm because of their poor advice and misunderstanding of the physiology. In bone marrow high in calcium, I seem to get some mixed results on Google search. About 800 milligrams serving. It depends. It depends on which different parts of the bone. There can be different, because you get some on the inner part. It has to do with the bone matrix, which is, again, what is bone? Mineralized collagen. So different bones have different ways of mineral depositing slightly, even internally. And so you may get more that actually gets into the bone marrow or into that inner part, or that flakes off much easier. You do get it in the joints. There's a bit in the joints extra, and I can't remember the other bones. So there is variability, and so that's probably why you're getting the different results. But it's stuff that I haven't looked at for ages, on the different levels of calcium that you can get from different bones, and also how much may end up in that inner part and potentially get into the bone marrow as well. There's a lot of variability in tissues, and I think there's actually even differences between species and even potentially between sexes. I have seen some varied studies and data of biopsies and stuff like that. So, yeah, but I haven't investigated into DI. I do know there's variability, but I don't think there's actually really good research. There's a lot of case studies that have looked at certain people, and in most cases, people that have already got underlying health issues. So those health issues may be a consequence of them secreting, and then the other stuff, which is based on food type bone broths, not looking at our own sort of skeletal structure, but looking at the animals that we eat. Even there's how was it processed? You know, there are differences between the animals as well. There are differences between the different bone parts. There are differences between grain-fed and grass-fed. There can be loss of calcium in the grain-fed ones, and that potentially could end up in the bone marrow and end up in other parts of the body as well, soft tissue. So there's a lot of variability, and it's stuff that I haven't looked. It's ruminant physiology that I haven't looked now at since I was paleo, which is about 12 odd years plus ago. So yeah, it's really distant in my memory. Let's put it that way. But there is variability. I would say taurine would be the big one that I would use for that purpose. And the fat soluble vitamins, make sure you've got good levels of vitamin D, because vitamin D plays an important role in regulating the matrix metalloproteinases, the MMPs. They go in there, and when you're turning over collagen structures, they're very heavily involved. So when you get fibrosis, you, in particular, MMP9 and MMP2, but I think in the lungs it's primarily 9. Secondary role is 2, primarily produced in the liver, and it's usually as a response to an injury that it'll come in. It causes a lot of this fibrosis. It's a method of trying to heal or stabilize the tissue, but if you get too much fibrosis, obviously that can cause health problems, as well. But it's a response. and if it's also when the liver is producing MMPs like matrix metalloproteinases, um, and they're not regulated by cofactors like retinol and vitamin D. If you're low on vitamin D or if you're low on retinol, um, usually retinol you shouldn't be if you're on a carnivorous diet. You should be able to, if you're eating eggs and eating stuff like that, and even the animal fats, you can actually some of the carotenoids that are in that, unless you've got conversion issues from dairy. Also, you should be able to get enough retinol to to provide that cofactor. But the big one, because when it comes to the things like the lungs, the breast tissue, the prostate, the key the key one is vitamin D, and retinol is secondary. In the skin, it's primary. It's the other way around in terms of regulating the MMPs in the skin, the cofactors. Why? Don't know. Um, ask God at the end of times for that question, or some scientist may work it out one day. But yeah, I would make sure that my vitamin D levels are good. Your diet should be fine in terms of giving you enough of the carotenoids and retinoids to support that part. But the vitamin D is going to be critical. And the other thing that actually breaks down and reduces fibrosis and provides that antifibrotic, it also helps in refolding correctly protein structures, and that's important as well in part of the healing and the antifibrotic effect of taurine as a sulfur amino acid. So I'd at least do 6 at a minimum. Again, can you tolerate? GP man, how much taurine can you tolerate? Yeah. And when it's taurine, it has to be the free form, which is similar to what we find in the tissue of the ruminant animals. Has to be and fish and stuff like that. Free form, not L-taurine or any of the others. Has to be the free form. And there's a number of brands out there that have got has to say free form. If it doesn't say free form, give it a miss. It's usually bound to something, or it's got other junk in it. Then it's just to make a bit of money. Thoughts thoughts on Jack Cruz saying carnivore is a winter diet? Yeah, I've heard that. Um, yeah, tell that to the Hudser and tell that to the you know even out of season. If you're in the in a savanna environment, what are you eating? Animal foods. So that's bullshit. And why would I want to eat sugar just because he's addicted? Just be honest, Jack. Say, I'm addicted. I love sugar. That's why I go into warmer climates so I can eat more sugar, you know? But just be honest about it. Don't try and justify it. It's higher in deuterium. It's going to be deleterious. Yes, okay, you can actually reduce by 19 parts per million if you're butt naked all day long and scaring the neighbours. But the reality is, that's bullshit. It's not practical for most people. Wherever you are, you're going to get more bang for your bucks. Obviously, if you're in a tropical environment, you can get a bit more energy via cytochrome C, via the mitochondria. But, just because, and depending on the genetics, even if you've got the best genetics and you get 30%, you still need food for the other 70%, So, here's what it is. You can't become a breatharian. You're going to waste away like some of the plant-based vegans, the fruitarians in particular. That's just illogical. It's just nonsense. It's just, again, him trying to justify, even in ancestral sort of settings, in interglacial periods like we are now, before agricultural exist, there was only small, close to the tropics, 2 seasons, and outside that, in the temperate climates, there was only 1 season, and only for a couple of weeks. That's when you had access to sugar. You didn't have any processing methods or whatever, and people didn't bother. Why process? People are lazy. They're not going to process things unless they build civilization and they build the machinery and, they are settled in one place. The majority of stuff that people consumed was some seasonal tubers and some seasonal fruit. That's it. So the rest of the year, whether it was hot or cold, they were eating animal foods. Because I don't see the Africans basically, in Africa it's continuously, even though there are 2 seasons where you've got certain um, wild plants that you can actually access that don't have a lot of sugar in them. They're just very fibrous, so you just cook them and then just suck out some of the actual, sweetness out of it. Again, it's like a treat. It's not your main food, and it's the same thing with the fruit. 2 seasons in those closer to the tropics sort of areas. In the tropics, in particular, it's 2. In the sort of environments like desert environments and all that, it's way more restricted. In arid areas like areas of the Maasai, the Hadza live and all that, there's bugger all. Southeast Asia, slightly different in that regard. But even there, most of the stuff's domesticated now. The wild stuff you can't even find. You do find a few in Java. I've actually travelled to Java a couple of times, and I've gone even in the mountainous areas where one friend of mine lives, and I've actually consumed some little berry type things that were seasonal as well. They only grow once a year. But they were very tart. They weren't sweet. They were very tart because there wasn't much sweetness in them, in these berries. And they just considered them. They got all these antioxidants and phyto, all these different nutrients, superfood, the sort of nonsense that we hear. But anyway, that was a long time ago, and I was into a bit of that nonsense myself, and far more ignorant than I am nowadays. I'm probably still ignorant about a few things. I'm still finding out and discovering things constantly because I'm looking and I'm investigating and thinking outside the box. Unfortunately, everybody else just likes to regurgitate the same shit 10 years later that some other ignorant person regurgitated 10 years earlier. So whether it was paleo and they're rehashing the paleo nonsense and all that sort of stuff, I'm over all that shit. If you really want to learn, you need to think in terms like an engineer. As I said, it should be a compulsory subject in the first year university to learn how to think correctly. And, unfortunately, people don't. Yeah, it's just nonsense, Jay. Absolute nonsense. Because, as I said, I can show you examples like the Hadza, the Sand people of the Kalahari, and a whole lot of other people. They only eat animal foods and nothing else. And it's pretty warm and cold in different periods of time, and it makes no difference. So, yeah. And as Jimkin said, after years of carnivore diet, I figure out that I need to eat dairy. After Harry mentioned that about low calcium absorption gene, thanks to Jacob Khan spreading lots of seeds in Korea. Haha. Yep. True. Yep. Definitely, they are pastoral, and a number, especially the northerners, as I said, Manchuria, because if you look at the genetic profile of Korea, Manchuria, all the way towards Inner Mongolia, there's a lot of similarities there. Even the sort of body composition as well, characteristics. I won't go into that, but you know what I mean. But very important that we understand these sort of things in terms of calcium, which I've covered in a different video about rising blood sugar and stuff like that on a carnivore diet. But it also is, other issues as well that it plays a big role in terms of the way the body responds. your electrolytes and a whole lot of other things. Why do I need electrolytes? Well, you may have an issue with your genetics. Yes. Is it possible to reverse an enlarged heart? Yes, it is, but it takes a long time. It takes well over 10 years. Taurine is the best thing you can do. Now, this is not medical advice. I can't tell you what to do. I got rid of all my fibrosis after my heart attack when I was 44. Now I'm nearly 58. And at that time, I was morbidly obese and weak and, yeah, in a really bad state, let's put it that way. And I had, heart fibrosis. My left lung was completely, glassed over. That's how bad it was. And I was doing high doses, like 12 and over grams of taurine. You work slowly up by 2 grams, then slowly increasing until, your tolerance. And I was doing that for a long period of time. And it pretty much decade or so, and I still do a bit. I've reduced it down now to 3 grams or 6 grams when I'm doing exercise and stuff like that, like weightlifting and stuff like that. But I was doing much higher levels in order to clear out my fibrosis, so I was able to clear out my fibrosis in my lungs, my heart completely, zero fibrosis. The last scan that I did in my left lung was down to about 19%, and that was in 2019, just as the sort of COVID madness was sort of starting before we had the lockdowns. And then I didn't bother. I said, why irradiate myself where I had glassing completely and my doctor thought that I'd get lung cancer, and now it's cleared up and now I can actually jog up the flight of stairs without having any real difficulty. So that's been sorted. But it does take, because you've got cellular turnover, which happens over a decade. So you have to persist with it in that regard. There is some information that BPC 157 can also help with some of the issues of these sort of injuries. But your key one is going to be taurine. I have done a video on it. Something, either it's a short, I can't remember now. Yeah, but I do discuss it. But to reduce fibrosis in the body generally, taurine is probably a thing, but it takes some time. And that's the downside. It won't happen quickly because you have to turn over all the cells in your body pretty much and remodel. The good thing about taurine is it inhibits left ventricular hypertrophy. So it inhibits the heart from enlarging. It deliberately inhibits it. And it also improves the protein folding. So the way the protein structures inside any organ, any part of the body, are manipulated, because it has the ability, because it's an osmolyte, to manipulate even water and impede to some extent entropy, which is the breakdown, sort of the entropic effect within the body. And that's been proven with, which a video that I haven't done yet. I've just forgot. Now you've reminded me, which has been research done by biophysicists, looking at the ability of taurine to manipulate and fold proteins correctly, maintaining their integrity, because proper protein folding is important for longevity. Poor protein folding is what accelerates the decline, so to speak. So it plays an important role in regulating a lot of systems and manipulating a lot of systems in the body. So it's an important molecule. If you're healthy completely, you should get enough from the animal foods, because you can synthesize and you should be able to get enough. But none of us are. We've come to these sort of diets because we're unhealthy. We've got a lot of damage to our bodies, and obviously under those sort of circumstances, we've got to do some of these biohacks, you know. Jay Ducky says, if the endurance athletes took taurine, would they live longer? Yes. By taking taurine means it's okay. Do zone 2? No. Training multiple times a week? No. You're still going to get some level. As I said, it can inhibit it. It can't completely stop it. Zone 2 isn't a healthy thing to do continuously. No tribal population does it. So it's never been, and no person who's done, like working on a farm, does a lot of physical work and not a lot of zone 2. Zone 2 isn't something we see in any population up until we created athletes. And let's not forget the first a marathon runner from Marathon to Athens to warn the Athenians of the invasion of the Persians, the first invasion at Marathon. That marathon runner died when he got to Athens and told them. So let that be a lesson to people that zone 2 is not a healthy thing. Now, if you're into competition, obviously I would recommend people take taurine if they're doing that sort of competition to reduce the amount of oxidative stress and damage they're going to be doing to their body, and also to inhibit the sort of remodeling of their heart that's actually happening. So that's why I would recommend that thing. But would I recommend zone 2? No. But I would, if somebody wants to do it or wants to basically, I would at least encourage them to protect themselves. Anyway, let's move on. A general question, but what do you think is causing the surge in colon cancer amongst young adults? HD, as if you don't know that Jabba the Hutt and his merry men have been out there spiking the world. Remember, there's been the problem is the little spiky things do have an effect on the immune system, and the immune system is what kills off the T lymphocytes and natural T killer cells. They are the ones that actually kill off the cancers in your body. It's only when your immune system is weak does cancer take hold for good. So if you're constantly doing this and weakening your immune system, what do you think is going to happen? You're going to get a surge of what? So they're called turbo cancers or explosive cancers as well. So that's what's happening. And, that's the consequence of, contraindicated ways that we have lived. So I would say to people, you have to think very carefully about these things. So we can't continue living the way it's not only the diet, it's what things that we put in, experimental things that we put into our bodies. Now, I can't really discuss this. I'd love to, but I can't really discuss it openly because the last time I did, I got a 3-month ban from our lovely friends at YouTube. So I don't want to affect negatively the channel, and that's why I can't say too much. But yeah, anything that actually affects negatively the immune system is going to affect then the ability of the immune system to fight off cancer. So yeah, not a good thing. Now, what can you do? You can take things like TA1, which is make sure your vitamin D levels is at a good level, at the high of normal, because that's going to give you the best support for your immune system. Then also good nutrition, TA1 peptide will also support the immune system as well with the T lymphocytes. Also, if you have done a lot of this sort of stuff, there is a protocol that can be done. I'll stick a link in the description so people can go to it and actually see it. I think I've done it in another live stream. Obviously, I may do a short video just saying, well, this is a protocol, what you do with it and all that, and see if they don't ban it. So I have to test it and see, what sort of, it's hard to get the information out there without putting at risk people's, your channel, or other people putting their channel at risk at this stage. So obviously high deuterium is going to damage your mitochondria, and you should try and actually lower your deuterium levels. But at the same time, the immune system is very important in killing off cancer cells. It's another reason why I'm very cagey about people that want to use NAD precursors at very high levels. At normal levels, not a problem. At very high levels, I do have a problem with that. Because it's just dangerous. Because it will lower the amount of CD38 cytokines from the senescent cells that actually are saying, kill me to the immune system. Now, with a weakened immune system, you'll get even more signaling, more cytokines, which can do more damage. So that can be a problem. But at the same time, if you suppress the CD38, then there is a potential risk that cell isn't taken out early enough and can go cancerous as well. So there's a lot of reasons for it. Now, if you've got too many, we know that the little spiky things can actually increase immuno and cellular senescence. That means they can damage your immune cells and your normal cells. We know taurine really plays a role in inhibiting senescence. That means it can reverse senescence. And I've covered that in videos before about senescent cells. But it's not enough to do that. You sort of still need the taurine, which helps with the thymus, with the T lymphocytes, activating them. You also need the vitamin D to be able to get them out of your bone marrow, the stem cells in that regard. So it's a combination of things. A product like Cerule could be helpful as well, because it'll introduce new stem cells that can be used for the immune system as well. So there's a lot of things like that can be useful to deal with this problem. But obviously, you want to limit this sort of activity, because otherwise you'll not only boost yourself, but you'll end up turbocharging, cancer as well. So that's what some of the evidence out there is showing. And I would say that is my personal opinion. This is not medical advice, but there is a lot of concern about this increase that is happening in the population. And we're not seeing it in populations that did less of this. Populations that did less of this are not seeing that. But populations that did more of this are seeing that. Now, that's a correlation. But if you look at some of the research that's showing that the little spiky friends can actually have a deleterious effect on the immune system, and we know the immune system is very important in killing off cancer cells and senescent cells before they become cancerous. Yeah, I think that's the strongest candidate with the strongest epidemiological sort of association. And there is some mechanistic studies that actually show an impairment to the immune system. And we know the immune system is very important. It doesn't take Einstein to work out if you're weakening the immune system, well, then you're going to be turbocharging the other end, aren't you? And then you end up with turbo cancer. So, yes, unfortunately. Could you compare formula breast milk, bovine milk in terms of deuterium and other ingredients and their impact on little humans if need? Look, breast milk's going to be the best. Don't worry about deuterium with young kids, breastfeeding kids, because they actually use it as a growth factor. Your mum will get deuterium depleted from the child. Remember, for the collagen structures, the bones, the ligaments and all that, you need deuterium. The child doesn't have enough. Needs to take in deuterium more to build more rigid bones, and so you need more deuterium as you're growing in your growth stage, because you're building more bones, and as you're rapidly building bones, those bones the collagen structures need more deuterium to have more stiffness, to have more firm, more structural integrity. So deuterium isn't a bad thing as long as it's in the right place, in the right tissue. Like in the wings of a soaring bird. They need to be really stiff, and those collagen structures are really stiff because of the deuterium. But you don't want in soft tissue and other parts to have a lot of deuterium, because that can be unhealthy or damaging to the mitochondria or create a lot of stiffness, excessive amounts in your body. So I wouldn't be worried about the children in terms of deuterium at all. That's a zero concern for me. It's more the quality. Obviously, breast milk's going to have more taurine. And if you want a bigger brain, remember the stem cells that are actually produced inside the brain to produce more brain tissue requires taurine. You can't, without enough taurine, you can't produce enough, new stem cells. Not for the periphery, other parts of the body. There you need, if you want stem cells, to go to cereal products, something like that, or fasting and stuff like that to sort of force up more stem cell production. But if the brain itself requires taurine essentially for that role as well, not only to, remodeling, but also a very important factor in actually promoting the proliferation of new stem cells in the brain to produce more brain cells. So very important even for older people to get more taurine, or get more animal foods that are going to provide them with taurine for the brain, for brain health and stuff like that. So absolutely. Now, bovine milk doesn't have enough taurine in comparison because it doesn't need it, most ruminant animals and all that have got small brains. They don't need a lot of taurine. Their taurine requirements are lower than us. We've got big brains. Our taurine requirements are higher. Okay, so there's your difference. Why bovine milk's going to be inferior to breast milk. The closest milk in terms of profile similarity is goat milk, then your sheep milk, and then your. But again, because the ruminant animals are going to have lower taurine levels in them. Formulas, it's a mixed bag. The quality of formulas is so varied. I don't focus on that. I don't do videos on that. There are other websites that look into formulas, their composition, and compare breast milk to. I have come across, if you do a formula milk versus breast milk, you'll find a whole lot of websites of, like nurses and other people like that are in them that are involved with anything, people that are involved with the birthing of kids and stuff like that, and breastfeeding and stuff like that. There's a number of websites on breastfeeding and stuff like that, and they will go into some of the the differences between different formulas and stuff like that. So there are videos around in that regard to look at the composition. I don't need to do a video of that sort because they do exist on the web. But the key thing that I always worry about with formulas and a bovine milk, does it have enough taurine in it? Well, obviously you can still give the child bovine milk and give them a bit of taurine supplemental. So half a gram. So it's you could still do something like that in that regard. But again, this is not, as I said, this is not medical advice. This is not nutritional advice for kids. This is not an area that I've looked into in that regard. And then there are kids that could have sulfur sensitivities. Could that be a problem? Potentially. So that's why I can't recommend anything. I can only say that, a bit of trial and error and investigation into these formulas and all that. At the end, breast milk's going to be best. If you can get breast milk into a child, it's going to be the best thing you can do. It's trouble free. You don't even have to think about it. After a day like today, I'm due for some no BS. Call that bad, Corey. Fair enough. It is what it is sometimes. G'day, mate. How's it going? Carnivore Club. I have noticed some of the other media, X and other things, you've put a bit of stuff there. Yeah, I've given you a bit of a tick. Yes, good to have you here. Some stage I have to get on some of the other social media a bit more. It's just having a day job can be a struggle trying to support all these different things, as you can understand. Should cancer patients avoid Serol in order not to replicate their cancerous cells? If they're metastatic, yes. If they're and it's not only Serol, any stem cell, if you're metastatic, could be a problem because at a metastatic stage, your immune system is too piss poor at that stage, and that's why it becomes metastatic. It just takes off. And in turbo cancers, obviously, that would be a problem as well. So, I would rather use things like Senolytics. I've got a whole playlist on cancer, which I cover Senolytics, how to kill off both cancerous and senescent cells with Pfizer and how to amplify its effect to 680%, I think it was. So how to do it, information. So there's a whole cancer playlist that covers a lot of that information, how to deal with it. So yes, that goes for all stem cells, not only for Serol. If somebody's metastatic, I could not, in good faith, recommend if they've got a poor immune system. There is a risk for something like that in that regard. So in very poor, when people's immune systems are really like crashed or destroyed, like with these turbo cancers, it seems like nothing really helps. At that stage, I usually say to people, take out a loan, get deuterium depleted water and try and bring down your deuterium levels to try and help, and possibly even take a bit of melatonin at night to try and help repair as fast as possible to get, ATP production back up and running to some level and reduce and force the cell to go into a senescent state to curb. It's very hard to do because most of the other stuff just at that stage doesn't really work. And if you can get TA1, which is also problematic because some countries have banned it, even though it's produced in the thyroid. Don't ask me why. It just is what it is because it can be used for athletes like BPC 157. but there are some labs in Europe and elsewhere that still produce it, and you can actually access it. I think Britain still produces. They don't have any crazy bans like in the US. They're the FDA and National Institute of Health and all that. I wonder who they're working for. It's not the people. So unfortunately, but it is. It can be problematic in that regard. So I would use different strategies in a metastatic state. In a non-metastatic state, yeah, it can be useful. It can um, deal with, because you've still got a strong immune system working synergistic with the immune system, it can help remove some of these cancer cells and replace them. So it's less of a problem. But in a metastatic state, which usually means that your immune system it's in the toilet and takes off, I wonder what actually damages the immune system so severely. What causes such oxidative stress to the immune system? What do oncologists do? I'll leave that thought. Yes. Should you irradiate yourself? Anyway, let's move on. Got to be very careful. It's a $1 trillion industry which you can't criticize. Remember? Otherwise, you're persona non grata. They'll eliminate you. Just checking whether there's an assassin just standing behind me from Big Pharma. Anyway, oh, I was going to put a video to promote my. I'll come back to you. And where's your cue, Dan? How dare you ask a question without a cue? Good to have you here, mate. Oops. And I will actually. This is an intermission, a promotional thing that I'm doing for my brother from another mother. So he sells coffee. I'm not getting any money from this, just to make it quite clear. I'm just doing this as he's a family member in a sense. We're close, so I'm supporting him and just promoting his coffee. It's the same coffee that I drink as well. So I'll mute myself shortly. I'll just share the screen and I'll put this commercial on and you can. Oh, yeah. I'll put it in a loop and I will put, now I haven't actually, one thing that, because I was talking to him on Saturday and I said I made it and he said, look, because you're actually promoting and all that, I'll give your subscribers a discount. So he's going to make a discount code with my name on it, Harry, at the end. But he needs to get the programmer to do it for him. He hasn't done that yet. So when that actually happens, I'll put in the actual description. I'm going to release a little video, this same thing. I'm going to probably redo this and then I'll put the actual in the descriptor with the actual code. So you can basically hit on that and then you'll get the discount. It'll be done like that. So let me just go back to presenting this. What am I doing? Share the screen. Okay, so hello everyone. I'm just promoting Thylacine Coffee. This is my brother from another mother, his business. So this is promoting not a paid advertising. This is my brother from another mother, his business to do. So this is promoting not a paid advertising. This is my brother from another mother, his business to do. So this is promoting not a paid advertising. This is my brother from another mother, his business to do. So this is promoting not a paid advertising. This is my spot from another mother, his business to do. So this is promoting not a paid advertising. This is my spot from another mother, his business to do. So this is promoting not a paid advertising. This is my spot from another mother, his business to do. So this is promoting not a paid advertising. This is my spot from another mother, his business to do. So this is promoting not a paid advertising.
Three different varieties of Thylacine Coffee. Three different varieties of
you know, like a sort of thing, sort of middle red label, which is, you know, something theme, I want to report on the thing, is middle which is sort of muscular theme, I want to report on the just go in there just read there, work on the purchase, and I believe they do bulk things as well. And there, they do purchase sort of annual as well. Check it out. If it's your thing, there, they do sort of annual as well. Check it out. If it's your thing, there, check it out. If it's your thing, and so I'm just supporting his family. His missus actually pretty much runs the website and does all the posting and handling stuff in that regard. But obviously, he's the boss of the business. So that's pretty much it. It's just doing something for the family, so to speak, the extended family. If people are interested, I know there are some carnivores that are coffee drinkers like myself. Some are not. That's fine, whatever floats your boat. But if you're interested in Tasmanian coffee with, some unique flavors and you want to try it out, now you know where. Anyway, that's it. See yous. But he's back. Anyway, there's a bit of a plug for the family. Oops. And I'll just throw the website in there. That's the website. But wait until I actually have the actual code. And so once I'll release a little video and I'll provide in the description the code. But if somebody wants to just look at what's available, they can check the website. And once I've got the discount code and all that, I'll add it to the video. And then if it's your thing, fine. If it's not, that's pretty much your business. Anyway, let's move on. Get back into the regular stuff. Now, what was Dan saying? Gary, you just wanted to let you know that 8 grams of taurine a day for the past 3 years has eliminated premature ventricular contraction I've had for over 50 years. it's a type of irregular heartbeat. Yep, it does do that. It's been shown to deal with anything regards to, because it actually remodels back the heart as it should be, and it also regulates the fluids and the ions really well, because it's an osmolyte, one of many, but it's one of the critical ones. What happens is the heart starts regulating and working properly again in the way it actually moves fluids through it and ions that are moving through in and out of those cells. So yeah, so I'm not surprised with your results, and a lot of people have had similar results in improving their heart function and stuff like that. So good for you. Another Dan, now David, the Q, where's the Q? Anyway, that's for another video, David. That would take too long to explain. Any biohacks to recover from ACL injury? I would say things like BPC 157 are going to be an important element to help with that recovery. More protein, more eggs that have got more cholesterol, because your needs for cholesterol and go up when you're actually healing. For all sorts of injuries in the past, they used to give, like even burns victims, they used to give them like these egg powders. They understood it. I don't know what now, because big pharma have taken over the way everything is managed care. But traditionally, in the old days, before a lot of the medicines existed, that's what they used to provide for burns victims, for people with these sort of injuries. There was a lot of protein, a lot of eggs and stuff like that, because they understood cholesterol. Half your cells at half their weight is pretty much made of cholesterol. It's why people would think that it's not important is beyond me. But if you listen to a lot of crackpots, not a fan. Not a fan. I think if there are certain conditions where it can be useful, but I'm not a promoter of it. I think it can cause certain side effects as well in the doses that some people are doing. But for certain conditions, yes, it can be useful, where there's been severe mitochondrial effect on the mitochondrial function. But it wouldn't be something that I would promote for healthy people or regular people. Yeah, those, at the end of the day, all these things, polypeptides and stuff like that, yes, are important. You can get them supplemental, or you can just eat more animal foods and your body will produce them. But compounds, especially like BPC 157, taurine as well. Taurine has been shown to help improve a lot of these injuries as well. So it's possibly working on the two mechanisms. One, in terms of the antifibrotic effect, and the second thing, it amplifies in the bones and in the collagen structures. It amplifies, in particular, in those structures, mTOR. And mTOR is very important to be amplified to basically do more in those structures. So it'd be important as well. Yes, yes. Yeah. She beats me. The longest I've actually done is 3.5 days, and I did it a while back before she even got into it. But yeah, nowadays I do a 24, 48 hour dry fast occasionally. But the longest I've done is 3.5 days. She's gone on to about a week. So pretty impressive. But she's done the right things. She understands refeeding syndrome. She understands all these sort of things. You've got to be very careful. I've actually pinned her latest one, and I also put a comment on top about refeeding syndrome, just to clarify a number of things, so it's quite clear to people if they venture to do something like that in that regard. Just keep that in mind. Any thoughts on solite and marine plasma? I'm not a big fan, to be honest. So not a big fan. I'm not a big fan to a lot of things, because the body has the ability to detox. The body has the ability to excrete things. The body has the ability to repair things and all that. As long as you give it the right nutrients. And what is our body made of? It's made of fats, cholesterol, protein, and you need some for the fluids. You need some micronutrients, and for the enzymes, you need some micronutrients like vitamins and minerals. And as long as you're getting those sort of things, and your body's going to be functional. And there are a few biohacks like taurine and a few other peptides that can play an important role. Some of these other things can be useful, but also can cause derangements in higher amounts or other problems and all that. And some of the claims that they make, I've never seen really like solid evidence for them. People that are plant-based that use some of these compounds and all that, I don't see them improving their health. But I see people go on a carnivore diet, getting way healthier, Stefan. So, yeah. Oh, the cue's below. I do like that. The cue's below. You remembered it. Thanks for the laugh. Myth. How are you? Is there any truth that BPC 157 increases cancer cell development? No. That's there is no connection. BPC 157 is produced naturally by the body. So it's primarily produced within the digestive tract. Stomach is the big one, and the gut. So the small intestine right through to the colon and all that. So different parts produce different amounts. But people say that because it's involved in angiogenesis, that means creating new blood vessels, that may allow for the spread of cancer. May. But the body itself, when you're in an older age, does angiogenesis anyway. It's the reason why if you sustain a heart injury in an older age, you can actually create new blood vessels around. A younger person can't. That is another reason why somebody that has a heart issue at a younger age, they can't do angiogenesis to get around the injury. Guess what happens? They drop dead at a higher rate, where an older person can actually recover much better because of angiogenesis. So if somebody's had a heart condition and they're young, what do you think I'd be recommending? Because that will initiate more angiogenesis and help them. So, and again, it's based on reductionist science. There is no cause and effect that's been proven. It's just, Angiogenesis can be exploited by cancer cells. And if you're in an older age bracket, you can actually do more angiogenesis than a younger person. Does that older person who does angiogenesis, do they actually die at a faster rate than a younger person that gets cancer? Not necessarily. So, even that doesn't correlate very well. And remember what we say, if something does not correlate, it is impossible to be causal, because something has to always correlate in order to be causal. You can't have something that doesn't associate, or it has the inverse relationship. That means the opposite. And that's the problem with that sort of reductionist thinking. Oh, cancer can. Oh, this can do that. Oh, then that should be problematic with cancer. First of all, you have to have cancer. Second of all, it has to be metastatic. And third of all, you have to prove a cause and effect, which hasn't been proven. It's a speculation. That's all it is. And I look at correlations of older people and younger people and middle-aged people and the different angiogenesis levels, and there is no, like, the older people are dying more rapidly than those younger people. On the opposite, those older people actually, in some regards, are not dying as fast. Could angiogenesis be helpful for the normal cells? And the heart conditions from Jabba the Hutt. So there's a lot of reductionist nonsense out there, and that's why I rail against it, because it's not real science. It's just bullshit, associated bullshit that people made up. And I go, look, not real. It's not real. It's make-believe. If you want to live in a make-believe world, fine. But yeah, it's associated. It's not even associated nonsense. It's speculation. But the reason why we say you should do it for 2 months, then take 3 months off, then do it for another 2 months and then take off, is because we don't want to initiate too much angiogenesis as well in the body. That's not a good thing. It's not like, we don't want to encourage the body to do something that naturally doesn't do unless there's an injury. Around an injury, you want to. That's why you take it, because it actually, you've got a bad knee, it'll create more angiogenesis around that injury and get more blood, more, nutrients in. It will break down some of that fibrosis to be able to get stuff in there to accelerate the healing. And that's the purpose of it. And it does the same thing in the gut, and it accelerates the healing. It actually, it's a reparative thing. So, an actual compound that's never been associated with any cancer until it became a supplement. And then people started saying, oh, it's associated. No, it's not. You guys have created a false association in your brains, and you're not looking at older, younger people and looking at cancer and angiogenesis that naturally occurs, and there's no correlation there or association. So why would just a compound that does the same thing be then causal? It's just sheer, I don't know, moronic thinking. Because not only ignorant thinking, there's also moronic thinking. Unfortunately, there's quite a few of them out there. One born every day. G'day, Todd. 63-year-old Carnivore. Where's your cube? You're too old to spank. And you'd probably enjoy it. That's the problem. Anyway, checked testosterone levels for info. I feel good. Total 1253 nanograms. Free, calculated bioavailability 200. I wouldn't worry. Testosterone can vary due to circadian rhythms, but also, and I'm going to do a video to demystify that, so I don't want to give too much away, but also, the variability between when you did it, at what time of the day, can actually have a variation. And on top of that, as well, how many receptor sites do you have to take it up? Unless going to be circulating. It's a bit more complicated. That's the problem. People think more is better. Oh, we need more T3. Oh, low carb does have lower T3. Well, it doesn't need it. Beta oxidation doesn't need it. Why would you have more to create a problematic physiological effect? It's the same thing with a lot of things. You do a lot of bodybuilding, you're going to have more receptor sites. Guess what's going to happen? I'm giving too much away. So, yeah, it's a much more complex picture. The ignorant Neanderthals out there. But the future video will cover this, and you'll get a better understanding of all these different hormones and how they work and different times of the day and what happens. And it'll be much clearer, and you'll be less concerned, because people are too much concerned. There are people out there that have got way higher and they're like that. They can't even build muscle. And other people have got way less. More in the bloodstream isn't better, people. Is it being utilised, stored? And this goes for every nutrient. Is it being utilised, stored, or basically unable to be utilised because you've got a problem? It may be high iron, high many things can be problematic. It doesn't mean it's a good thing just because, you know. So we need to get away from that thinking. There's just so much terrible thinking out there. It's monumental. Many crackpots to slay. Ramika, how are you, mate? How can I overcome severe taste fatigue? Taste fatigue? Where every meat tastes bland. Put some butter on it and give it a bit more taste. Some spices. I can't think of anything else. Now there is issues with some of the respiratory infections like the C19, which can affect the people's taste buds. So if you've been exposed, so if that's I don't know if that's a recent thing that's actually happened to you. If it is that, then it will clear up. If it's just generally that you've been eating the same food every single day, and your sort of taste buds have gone, this just maybe you're eating too much, and you should listen to your body and not eat as much. That could be also the reason why it's like there's not fatigue of your taste buds. It's just basically I'm going, this isn't as enjoyable. That could be an issue. I don't know. You would have to look at yourself, cut back and see, am I feeling better? Is it tasting better? Because usually if food starts not tasting as interesting, it's because you're not hungry and you may be eating too much. That's another thing that may be happening. You'll have to work that one out yourself by reducing and seeing how it tastes. Naturopath I consulted recently recommended 100 milligrams of iodine for thyroid issues. When questioned, said that it is misinformation that iodine depletes selenium, thus high iodine depletes selenium. There is some research that actually shows that it possibly does. And that's why I usually say to people, we've got no experimental evidence, but we've got some naturopaths saying it does, some naturopaths saying it doesn't, and some people that have actually have done hair mineral tests after they've been doing a lot of higher doses of iodine have found very low selenium levels, even though they were eating eggs and other things that are higher in selenium, and they were going, well, it seems to be affecting me. So there's possibly some truth in that, and that's why I say to people, I've always said it, that there is some anecdotal evidence that it does, and unless you're actually flushing out halogens, that means you've got a lot of bromide, all these halogens, fluoride in your thyroid, and you need to flush them out. And that's been validated through some testing. But yeah, I could justify a certain level of iodine to flush things out, even in short term higher doses. But it as I said, it all depends on where you are. So there's going to be some variability between people for a lot of reasons, so where your levels are. But I think saying that, arguing, I'm, I don't know, I'm a bit cagey about that whole idea, because we're talking about, thousands of percentages beyond the sort of physiological levels that we normally would take in that regard. So in the presence of selenium, what research has shown is that when there is selenium in the system sufficient, you don't see toxicity from iodine, even in higher doses. But when you have very low selenium, you do see toxicity from iodine, and this has been recorded, and it's not only us that it's been recorded from case studies, but also in other animals as well. Similar things are noticed. So I don't know where your naturopath is getting this information in that regard, that selenium is unimportant in that regard. If you are putting in higher levels of iodine, you're potentially causing some level of displacement of selenium in the thyroid, and not only the halogens that you're going to knock out, but you're also, and that's why I usually say, if you're going to do, you're dealing with fluoride, or it's been identified through tests that you've got a lot of halogens in your system, like bromide and many other things, all these other halogens. Then if you're going to do a higher dosage to clear those out, then you should take more selenium to prevent this sort of depleting effect. So as I said, there hasn't been like scientific research. These are sort of case studies where people have noticed, where medical doctors, MDs, that is, not naturopaths, but MDs, that have noticed these sort of conditions where people have turned up in emergency and they've got very high iodine levels and very low selenium levels, and they've noticed these sort of issues. So for a naturopath to argue that there's not a problem with high dosing of iodine, I think that there is a problem with that thinking. Again, it's reductionist thinking. Again, take a pill is the MD approach. Take a supplement is the naturopath approach. I've said this before. They see things in a very narrow way that they understand, and they don't think of the consequences. It's like that other what's his name, Smith something, Dr. Smith, who's another naturopath that ended up giving his clients very high doses of vitamin D and vitamin A, and ended up causing them toxicity levels, and then blamed that vitamin A and vitamin D are bad for you. No, in the right physiological range, that they are essential. They regulate a whole lot of the MMPs. That's Gareth Smith. Exactly. Thanks, Scotty. They regulate a lot of the collagen-degrading enzymes, the cell proliferation differentiation in cells. So they're essential, but they're not essential in massive amounts. But close to zero, that's a bad thing as well. It's the same thing with iodine and selenium and everything. There is proper physiological ranges. There's a certain excretion rate. And I've done some videos on a number of like potassium, magnesium, and many other things. What is the excretion rate? It's this: 120 for magnesium, 192 milligrams for, when it comes to basically potassium, and then even calcium has certain excretion rate. There is a bit more. It varies. There are a whole lot of other reasons, and I suspect there are these osmotic effects are playing a role as well in lower intake and higher intake, and it affects. So that's a bit more complex. That's another day, another video that I have to make on calcium homeostasis and cover it properly, and excretion rates and everything else. But it can be down to 50 milligrams. That's how low. So when people tell you 1,000 milligrams, really? So there's a lot of issues, and this is the problem when people see the thing in a very reductionist way. This is what you need to get, or this is what you need to do, and all that. They can't see the forest from the tree. You know what I mean? They're too fixated, again, due to reductionism on the tree and not the forest, and seeing the overall picture of the system. And that's largely where this thinking and problem comes from. And we end up with this problematic thinking. I would not do those sort of levels personally. In that regard, they are in the, because it's, that's way, way in excess from the normal sort of ranges that you should be at in that regard. So it's, because your 100% is about, 150, because it's 100 to 100 to 200, so it's about 150 micrograms. So mcg, or the Greek M with a G, where that's way higher, because that's in the thousands of percentage points. Yeah, and if I was actually, I'd be eating a few more eggs to get my selenium and my iodine levels up, and I'd be cutting out all the sources of these things that are coming through my system. I'd be on a species appropriate diet supporting my detox pathways, so they work better and they can excrete through the bile more of these halogens and things like that. That's what I'd be doing. I wouldn't be basically megadosing with iodine unless there was a nuclear explosion that just happened, but otherwise, no. So I do have a lot of concern. I hope you're not doing these megadoses. I can't tell you what to do. I can't give you medical advice in that regard, but personally, I would not do something like this if I was in your shoes, is what I'm trying to say. I have to be careful what I say to protect my channel. Yep, I can't help you if you haven't understood it. Check my APOE on Pim's playlist. Maybe that will help you understand it a bit better. Low carbon fasting advocate YouTuber Polyne's Human claims that the Randall cycle is an outdated concept before we knew about glucagon and GLUT4 transporters. I'd have to look at what he's saying. The Randall cycle is not something that actually emerged just in the 60s without any research. It's quite clear that what it is. And we knew about insulin, and we knew about, about glucagon and GLUT4. We knew about the GLUT receptors. We may have not understood very clearly how they all worked, but, that doesn't mean that we didn't understand that there was this effect, just because you don't understand which GLUT receptor insulin is playing on, it doesn't mean you don't understand, because we've known for more than 100 years about insulin and glucagon. Trying to remember out. So back in 1922, glucagon. So we've known about glucagon since 1922, and the Randall cycle was actually described in 1963 with a published research. So Randall knew about glucagon, knew about insulin, knew about all these sort of things. So I don't know where he's coming from claiming that the Randall cycle is an outdated concept before we knew about glucagon, when we knew about glucagon 20 years earlier, and Randall knew about glucagon and insulin, and and also the GLUT receptors and all that. They knew about them as well because it's described in the work. All the GLUT receptors and the CD36 receptor. I've got no idea what he's talking about personally, because we knew about these things. Randall, without knowing about these things, could not describe glycolysis and glycolysis and and beta oxidation. You have to have knowledge of all these receptors to be able to do that, and he did, because it's in all the diagrams that he created. So I don't get it what he's saying, So yeah, and to claim that he didn't know about glucagon is ridiculous because it was known 20 years earlier, and the receptors have been known. They may have not been fully understood to the level which we understand them now, but even now there are some gaps in our knowledge. But that doesn't mean that the Randall cycle isn't real, doesn't happen. And we know quite clearly it does, because we see the construct of insulin resistance happening, where things stay in the bloodstream and don't actually get uptaken by cells because there's this blockade effect. So it definitely happens, and it's been tested, so we know it does happen, and it's been done in vivo and in vitro and in vivo type studies to be validated in terms of the cell behavior to substrates of excess energy coming in from two different sources. So we know it works. And glucagon was well known before, so I've got no idea what he's talking about. Look, people make all sorts of claims about things. They may have heard it somewhere and then repeat. This is the problem with repetition. When you hear something from someone and then you repeat it, the danger there is you'll repeat nonsense. And that's why a lot of the paleo stuff's coming back, and a lot of the other stuff keeps on regurgitating and coming back and forth all the time. Again, it's the same sort of issue. Too much nonsense that gets repeated. He says, in reality, the body shunts glucose into the muscles instead of, it's not burning it, oxidizing it. Carbs increase triglycerides. So a sticky, high-carb diet would constantly see the effect of the Randall cycle. No, that's not the case. The Randall cycle is an increase of both in excess. You can actually have mixed diet like many populations, and if you're under eating what your energy requirements are, or you're exercising heavily and you don't get excess, then you're not going to get the engagement of the Randall cycle, or a very low gradient of it. It's the excess. It'll happen more to a couch potato than it'll happen to an athlete, until they become a couch potato and stop being a high-end athlete. So there is, and and just because you're putting in the muscle glycogen whoopee. We store some fat and some glycogen in the muscle to be available close by. We also have around our organs, we don't need excessive amounts because it's a problem, but you need some level of visceral fat. That visceral fat provides immediate energy, rapid energy you can actually access very quickly because it's close to the actual organ to take it in. So, and it's the same thing with intracellular inside the actual, the both the cells and also the tissue itself. There are pockets in muscle tissue that'll have fat, that'll have glycogen to be available. That's normal stuff. It has nothing to do with the Randall cycle. The Randall cycle is mixed macros in excess, not single macros. That's why the vegans can actually waste away. And somebody on a strict low carb diet with a low insulin can do the same thing. There's a glucagon to insulin ratio that explains that. And that relates to the Randall cycle. When the insulin is high and the glucagon is lower, then basically that is hormonal signaling that relates to excess of both energies. Think system. Don't think just, these things. They're not all independent. They're interacting with what the cell's doing and they're signaling, saying, this is changing. There's too much. If there's less, like when you're fasting, insulin to glucagon goes 0.8 to 1. Less insulin, more glucagon for gluconeogenesis. Plus, you need less because you want to increase the amount that you're pushing out in terms of glucose and free fatty acids. Because you're not eating energy. Okay? Mass, you're not eating fat. So what you have to push glucagon slightly higher, the ratio to insulin, in order to basically, because even some insulin has an effect on hormone-sensitive lipase. How high hormone-sensitive lipase signaling has to do is where insulin is. Slightly higher, it will have a more suppressive effect on hormone-sensitive lipase. Hormone-sensitive lipase and also have a suppressive effect on cortisol. And cortisol basically tells the body, we need more to generate more energy. So that's when it's signaling. It's not stress. That's not stress. That's telling the body to upregulate gluconeogenesis. It's a signaling thing, and it goes up and then comes down to baseline. But when you don't think, you think in a reductionist crackpot way, you can't understand this interaction. This goes up, that goes down, that goes adjusts depending on what's coming in or what isn't in the system. There's a signaling adjustments telling the body what situation is in terms of energy and substrates flowing through the body and what we need to release and what we don't need to release. The body's not going to flood the body with certain things. And if you give it too much, then it's going to basically just take hormonal and receptor behavior from the signaling to shut down certain things and go, we're not taking this. The body is very smart and it's got these regulatory systems and feedbacks that are interacting. That's why all the hormones are talking with the body continuously and adjusting slightly. The problem is crackpots can't think in that way as a system. They always think in a reduction of, this is doing, must be a disaster. No, you idiot. It's doing that because that other stuff is doing this other stuff. That's why. But you're a low IQ person and can't get your head around it to think in systems and how the body's responding to what's happening to it. Yes. I get a lot of these sort of comments all the time, Jay. The fun. Sometimes it's impossible to explain to people who don't have the capacity. Sorry, but it's just the reality. And there's many YouTubers out there, IQ shaming for the win. But it's true, Lukey. I can't help that I can have deep insights and others out there can't, Unfortunately, it's the reality, and it's very hard to I try to dumb it down as much as possible, but there's only so much you can do without losing all context in that regard. But the reality is, this is how the body responds. You put fat in, even fat will have a slightly elevating effect on insulin to glucagon. So insulin will go up to 1.3, and if you put a bit more protein, up to 1.4 potentially. Less protein, 1.3, 1.4 to insulin to glucagon, the amount of signaling. That even bump from, 0.8 to 1.5 now, that is going to affect hormone-sensitive lipase. One, it's going to lower down the gluconeogenic effect as well, because more things are coming in, so the body's going, we're going to use other substrates. We don't need to use as many aminos, so let's clamp on that, and we'll use the other pathways. And, we don't need as much fat to come out as free fatty acids. So that little bump is going to push down slightly hormone-sensitive lipase, so less comes out of the adipose tissue, out of the fat cells, because we don't need as much. We don't want to overload the system. It's trying to regulate all these and work out demands and say, how much do the cells need in terms of glucose and in terms of fat, for glycogen, for the peripheral tissue, how much of this sort of stuff. And it's trying to manage all these energy, and these hormones are adjusting and signaling and telling the body, we need this amount, we need to lower that a bit, we need to increase this a bit, we need to make this adjustment, more of this guy's eating even more fat, lower hormone-sensitive lipase even more, push insulin to glucagon slightly higher, the signaling, the ratio. So all these things are adjustments that are actually happening dynamically in the body, responding to all these changes that are happening, these dynamic changes. And that's what hormones are doing. You have to get your head to think as a system. If I put these different inputs, it's going to respond different. If I rev up my engine, it's going to push more fuel into that engine. If I don't rev it as much, it's not. That's a simplistic model of a system, but all systems behave in a very similar way. They will respond to the inputs, and respond in the way there is other components that require certain things. And if they don't get them, you'll hear some funny noises coming out of the engine. And it's the same thing with the body. And it's usually things like then oxidative stress and all inflammation and all these things. That's the noise our bodies make. So you've got to get your head beyond that reductions. And the problem is a lot of these people have very poor understanding of how systems work or our physiology works, and they can't escape this sort of reductionist thinking. And so when they see certain things, they go, that must mean that, or that must mean this. Just nonsense, A higher of this, when all the other stuff are doing other things, can mean one thing. A higher of this, same signaling molecule when other things are doing other things, means something completely different, because it's a different relationship and it's affecting different pathways, different hormones, different receptors, different things in the body. These variabilities. Where is mTOR being expressed? mTOR is a growth factor, yes, thank you very much. But if it's being expressed in the bones and the muscles, that's a good thing, because you're growing stronger and bigger bones and healthier bones. If it's expressed in the adipose tissue, well, then it's a problem. It's pushing growth pathways that are unhealthy growth pathways. So there is a difference between one and the other. And this is a problem that people are constantly getting confused. And, it's endemic out there, or the amount of misunderstanding of how the physiology works, Yes. What else? We have triglycerides, which means we constantly have ways to more fat in the blood at any time than sugar, so you can never probably avoid mixing. No, that's just nonsense as well. That's nonsense. When you're actually in a low-carb state, you get what is called the peripheral resistance. that means the receptor site, GLUT4, doesn't take stuff in. And insulin is much lower as a consequence of that. As I said, if you put more of the other food in, insulin will go up. The insulin to glucagon will change. If you don't, it'll go further down. When it goes further down, what happens? You're not going to be pushing more glucose out than what you need. You do slightly more exercise, so you need glycogen. Well, you'll actually increase it slightly. These are dynamically adjusting all the time. That's just reductionist thinking. Oh, this is going to do that. Absolutely not. Even if it's circulating due to you've exercised and you need more for your muscles, it's not going to go into be utilized by the cell for energy production, for ATP. It's still going to use the free fatty acids. It will primarily, only slight excess that the body hasn't used for glycogen or anything else, that can go through GLUT1. And that does not require at all insulin. Okay? So there's a difference in that. The body can take out excess as well from the periphery, even though it has supposedly this construct of peripheral resistance. The body's a very smart thing, dynamically adjusting. It's like it does a beautiful dance. Unfortunately, most people struggle to, a lot of people out there, unfortunately. Also, isn't the Randall cycle only activated when the energy overplus? Pretty much. In general terms, yes. If you're under eating and you've got less, no, it's not going to happen because there's no excess in any of the cells. But if there's excess in the system, and also Randall cycle doesn't activate in every single cell at the same time or at the same degree. Depends on how much that cell sucked in. You can have cells closer to where the source of energy is coming in or being delivered, closer to those trucks that are moving the stuff around. And obviously they're going to take more in of certain things, and others that are further away in the periphery are going to take less and take less later and are going to have a different rate of Randall cycle activation. But talked about it, but he hasn't gone into detail because he doesn't want to complicate things or confuse people too much. But that's what's happening. There is variability there as well. But it is, in the general terms, if we're talking about general, sort of like an academic way of explaining it, yes, it is a surplus that you will get this sort of situation happening where the cells start going, nah, and it does have that effect. And it's a gradient. That's what we call a gradient. If you've got severe, like very high insulin to glucagon, then you'll have a lockout, complete lockout, which is what happened on people on, very poor, sad diets, that you have this complete lockout. I've also talked about it on Pim's channel recently about how deuterium can actually increase the Randall cycle activation even at lower intakes of food because of mitochondrial damage. So if people haven't looked at those videos, I have linked them in that playlist. You can go and actually connect to them and actually read them. Watch them, read them. That's what I do. I read things. Plenty of things, too many things. APOE video, thank you, Scotty, and the one that Bart did as well on Science. And how are you, mate? Haven't seen you around for a while, Bob. How's winter treating me down here? Hasn't been too bad. I have to say, honestly, it hasn't really been as bad as we've had. Tasmania's funny. Sometimes you get really good winters, mild winters, and sometimes you really get shitty winters, and it varies. It is slightly colder than last year, and that's true. But also, before it got cold, it took quite some time. It only recently started getting cold, where last year wasn't as cold, but it actually started a bit earlier. The question is, it's going to end a bit later this year. I'm uncertain about that. So there's, haven't really checked recently to see, because it does, the amount of sunspots do affect the amount of, interstellar sort of solar, energy that comes, or so non-solar energy that comes in. So cosmic rays and stuff like that are coming in from deep space. They do have an effect on our cloud formations and the reflectivity of those. So there can be some change, and I think there is a bit of a change. It's not as big as some other years, so it can vary. So it feels slightly colder. In our autumn was warmer than last year's, but this year's winter seems to be slightly colder than last year. So it's sort of like they've flipped. But I haven't actually looked into, looking at the amount of energy coming in from interstellar space and the interactions between the energy coming from the sun that has an effect on cloud formation and some of these effects. So I haven't looked at this year's data to basically, but sometimes it is what it is. I'm a tough boy. I can handle it. Matthew, how much taurine is lost during cooking? It varies depending on how you cook it, stuff like that. Have a cooked ground of beef more than 160 degrees, I'm told, since it handled more. Will cooking all the way to 160 reduce a lot of taurine? It depends. It really depends. Depends on how long the animal's been hanging there before it got to the supermarket, before you got it, and before you cooked it, and how long you cooked it, and things like that. So there's a lot of variables in that to basically say exactly how much is going to be lost throughout from the slaughter all the way to being eaten, so to speak. So, and that's why whenever you look at studies, there's a lot of variability. Like some will have the animal will have like, 400 milligrams, and other cases will only have 100, and there are cases where it's only got 50. So you can have a variability between 50 all the way up to 400 milligrams. So there can be quite substantial difference depending on the time of the slaughter, how far back it was, how long it's been hung up, in a refrigerator, how long it's been refrigerated before it got to be cut up and then to get to the supermarket, and it goes on and on. So there's so much variability. The only thing you can be certain is we're going to have less taurine in the free form taurine compared to somebody who's a tribal person who just slaughtered an animal. It's not the same in that regard. You're going to get more fluids, you're going to get more taurine in comparison. How much? It's just impossible to know. You'd have to test every single sample of meat that you got, which is not practical. And it's the reason why I say to people, if you don't want to take taurine supplementation because you're fairly fine and all that, you're not over 65, you can still synthesize from the amino acids a certain level in a methionine and cysteine, then you go, maybe I don't need to worry too much about that. But if you've got underlying fibrosis, you've got underlying things, you're gonna have to supplement to deal with those sort of things, underlying health issues. You're not from birth to death, living a naturalistic life. You're living in a civilization which for the last couple of decades you've probably been doing everything wrong in the way you've been eating in terms of species appropriateness, in terms of diet. While I may be saying that, you could also, let's say you go, well, I'm relatively healthy, Harry. I don't really have any issues, health problems or anything like that. Could I incorporate anything else? Well, I could say you can. You can incorporate once or twice a week fish. And seafood has higher levels of taurine compared to ruminant animals. So in terms of the free form. Plus, you're still getting the number of the aminos to synthesize additional stuff. So that's your other option as well. So when people say, because even when we look at the N15 data, we find that people are still getting a certain proportion from some coastal fish or river fish. So they're still getting something there, and they're still getting some seafood in their diet. Not a lot, but some. I have fish once or twice a week myself. Again, and not for the taurine or anything like that. Just and even I don't even do it for the omega-3s. That's I've even on that issue I've done some deep research recently, and I've realised that a lot of the actual bullshit about DHA, EPA, and ALA, and many of the others is complete and utter nonsense. And it's a much more complex thing in the way we store the omegas and the amount of 30 plus odd variations and the way the body works. It's a far more complicated picture. I will be doing a video on it, and you'll realise why even if you don't have any fish whatsoever and just eat ruminant animals, you'll get more than enough and have no problems. And it'll demystify a lot of things, and you'll realise, shit, how much bullshit have we been fed by all these people that are not really looking properly and deep enough into physiology. And the problem is that, some of these people that have looked at some of this stuff, there's probably about a handful of people, academics, that looked at, they didn't get much citations, and they just went by the wayside. And the majority of citations is all the supplement makers that are making omega-3 supplements, and all the other proponents that are pushing things like the plant-based sort of supplements and ALA and whatever else. And that's where most of the research has been, completely ignoring all this other area where just a handful of academics have looked into it out of curiosity, haven't been cited. And sometimes when you do a deep dive looking at PubMed or the National Institute of Health or some of the overseas, I find a lot of things in overseas sometimes. I think this one is an overseas one as well. Say no more. America is basically, in terms of if it's not paid and bought by the supplement companies, it's paid and bought by the pharmaceutical big pharma. And the problem is they're not looking into physiology in the right way. They're doing the same bullshit studies, and everybody's just ticking off everyone else, and everyone is just doing. That's why 90% of stuff is shit. Everyone is basically just citing other people and doing all these reviews so they can actually just put more paper out to say, oh, I did so many studies. Well, they're all reviews and they're all bullshit. And that's, for academic citations. And some of the good stuff has just either been lost or forgotten in the distant past, and people have just, moved on. And so there's a lot of nonsense out there, unfortunately, and it's not people's fault. I was ignorant about a lot of this sort of stuff until I started doing deep dives, but I do have that personality quirk where I need to understand things, and it will gnaw at my soul. Well, most people, if they get one answer, they're satisfied and move on. I can't unless I've actually pretty much gone to such nth degrees to prove myself wrong. And eventually I do, and I find out new information and realise and have much deeper insights. but that's because I never stop. I want to understand it better. You guys get the benefit out of that, but pretty much that's how I think. I'm always, even the stuff that I know currently, I'm always, could I be wrong on some of these things? I'm always questioning myself. I don't trust myself that I'm 100% certain. I'm not God, God knows everything. I don't. Um, you know, all I can do is try to tease out more of this information by looking a bit deeper into things. So you must be falling apart with inflammation, Scotty, if you haven't had fish for 5 years. Shocking. But look, obviously, I still like fish, so I'm not going to, just because I realise that I don't need as much fish now with this new knowledge that I'll be making a video about. It doesn't mean that I don't like fish. I'm still going to eat fish. I still like things like calamari. I still like octopus. I like those things. I grew up with those things. My parents cooked them, from my Greek background. I enjoy them, so I'm not going to give up on them. But I'm not. But I'm slightly more enlightened, because I would just say the word slightly. Slightly less ignorant than what I was, some time back. And that's really, it's just every single step. Octopus are friends and not food, Harry. That's funny. God, I can tell you, damn. When we were young, we actually went down to Eagle Hawk Bay, and we grabbed a couple of octopuses and all that. Now, my uncle didn't secure them properly. This is on Mum's side of the family, and he actually put the top on the bucket like a clip thing, but he didn't clip it properly. And what happened is the octopus was able to push it open and just came over my cousin. And as he was sitting in the back seat, and they both, because it was the three cousins were in the back, and all three of them were sort of vacating the car. They just slammed on the brakes on the side, and everybody was jumping out. And Dad said, "What the hell happened?" So we just stopped further down, and we went back to find out what was happening. And apparently, the octopus had just come out onto the seat. It was very funny. So, yes, well, the octopus did get against my cousins, did get some revenge. But then we took it further down, and Dad bashed the living daylights, because you have to tenderise them on rocks. I used to have to do that. The old man used to get me to do that. Slave driver. Yeah. Still love him, even though he was my slave driver. Anyway, hello, Oggy. Oggy, you're late. I'm going to get Ted to have a conversation with you. I'll have to call him. He's in New Zealand. But he does get around even at night. Yes, he has ways and means of travelling to any corner of the world. You've been warned. G'day, mate. Saw your comment earlier, and I did see a few things. Ian, too sexy. I'm glad you are. Yo, Harry, unrelated question, but you got any vices? Oh, plenty. Oh, plenty. Who doesn't have vices? I mean, I may be Orthodox Christian, but I'm not, nobody's without vices in this world in that regard. Probably, too many sexual thoughts is probably one of my religious vices that I try to manage. So, yes, me, yes. And I know I can't explain that to God, but anyway, yes. So that's one of my vices. I did have a smoking vice that's long gone, at mid-30s when I gave that up. Alcohol, I've limited that quite a bit, but I have to be honest, I do consume occasionally. So when somebody's retiring at work, yes, or somebody's, going away, or there's a sort of, Christmas, Pascha, our Easter, what we call Easter, things like that. Obviously, social occasions, there's going to be a bit of that. So, yeah, I do have the occasional cheat meal now and then. So, yeah, I'm not perfect, never claimed to be perfect or anything like that. Just because I do something doesn't actually, when I will criticise somebody, like what Jack was saying. Oh, you can have carbs or you can have seed oils if you're in the tropics. Bullshit. It's still harmful for you. I'm not going to justify something. I may do it, like I may have an ice cream or I may have a drink occasionally, because nobody's can be 100% pure in this world. Anybody tells you that they're lying to you or they're bullshitting to themselves, they're lying to themselves. But, I try and keep as much close to doing the right thing by my body because I know it's going to cause me damage. Even coffee is contraindicated. It's not indicated. You know, it's not healthy. I'm not going to claim it is. And then I was promoting my brother's from another mother, his coffee. But, as I said, at the end of the day, yes, we do have some vices. Coffee's probably, you know, 2 to 3 cups a day is my vice. Sometimes I have cut it out for a couple of weeks, and that's hard because and it's not because of the addiction. It's not like I want it. I have to have it. I can just ignore it and all that. If I was addicted to coffee, then because I've got genes that clear out coffee very fast, like caffeine out of my system. I think I've shown them on an older video, and so I can detox very fast. So I can clear out caffeine. I enjoy the taste. It's just the taste, and since it's not going to engage the Randall cycle, it's not sugar, it's not something like that, but it's got other anti nutrients, obviously, but it's got very little. It's got very little oxalate because the quantity is very small that you're ingesting. So you're not it's like there's a difference between a plant that's big and difference. You could, if you're a Puritan carnivore, you may say putting some seasoning is a vice for some people. Obviously I put a bit of pepper and a bit of salt and a bit of um, oregano, and depending on how you want to call it. And I do like rosemary as well, especially on my steaks. I don't put it on my pork, and I don't put it on my lamb. I usually prefer putting oregano on those two, but beef steak I will put rosemary. And on eggs, I also like, for some reason, I like putting salt and pepper and rosemary on my eggs. They just they've got a nice taste. Well, I enjoy it anyway. So, yeah, but, probably the things that I had, the biggest vices when I was younger would have been smoking and drinking. They would have been the biggest vices, two big poisons for the body. Nowadays, they're quite reduced. Smoking has completely been eliminated, but when it comes to drinking, that's gone completely down. Probably the only thing on the smoking side that I've ever done, I have to disagree, Harry. Rosemary on lamb. I have put it on lamb, but I'll tell you the reason why I don't put it on lamb, Scotty. I like the flavour of lamb. And if I put too many herbs and spices on lamb, you're actually tasting more the herbs than the lamb itself. And that's another reason why I don't like beef that much, because I find it too bland. And I enjoy lamb because it's got the flavour of lamb is what I enjoy. So that's sort of the reason. And I do use this Mexican oregano, which is like which is slightly larger. It's got bigger leaves and doesn't have as strong a taste, and so it's more subtle. And so I prefer that. Make a stew with rosemary, put cubed lamb on it. Okay, we'll disagree on that, because I have put rosemary before on lamb, but I prefer minimal seasoning on lamb. And the reason for that is because of the taste. I like the taste. Sometimes I don't put any seasoning other than a bit of salt, because lamb has a really nice taste, and I don't want to mask it with anything. But that's me, I enjoy it like that. So Jim Kim dried with rosemary with liver, I have as well. I've mentioned that before. We do a thing where we cut thin strips of liver. We basically put them in a bowl with rosemary and salt, mix it up, let it put in the fridge for a couple of hours, or even half an hour should be enough. And then you barbecue these sticks, and they become like they get dried out to some extent. They become like sticks, liver sticks. And I can tell you, they are, with the rosemary on them, they are addictive. So, have made those in the past. Yeah, look, I'm not, I haven't killed anyone yet. So, anything like that. So, I don't have terrible vices. But as I said, the two key things are is possibly the occasional cheat and the occasional drinking of alcohol. It's probably the two minimal vices. I can't be bothered anymore. And they cost so much money. I mean, alcohol in Australia has become so expensive, prohibitively. Even before I became a carnivore, I started reducing because it became more expensive every single year, because it just had more taxes to it. So it's an expensive, let's say, vice. So I pretty much have done away with that in that regard. Anyway, been eating lean meat, high protein to slim out after reaching body leaner. Should I lower protein and add fat, or just add fat back? Depends what you're trying to achieve, Bob. If your protein needs will be based on as I said earlier, the physical activity. Low physical activity, you probably only need 2 grams per kilo body weight. More activity, 3 grams. Really high level of activity, 4 grams. That means double the amount of protein that you would if you were just, sitting around just living normal, not doing a lot of physical strenuous exercise, just normal sort of living, a bit of lifting here or stuff like that, but nothing like training or anything like that. If you're training more, you go into the gym a number of times a week, but you're not doing competition level, then you should be about 3 grams. If you're doing competition level, then you definitely need to be closer to 3.5 to 4, because you need the extra protein, because you're ripping your your muscles to such a level where the requirements of protein goes significantly up. So it depends on that. So don't look at them. I talk about ratios about 1-to-1, but that's in general people that just living normal life, it's got normal body composition and everything else. Everything outside that, they have to play with those other things. And so you potentially could be anywhere from, if you're basically initially, you may up your fat and then try and actually push up your metabolic rate, a bit like priming, but not exactly like it's just increasing to some extent. And then you cut back to about a third of that, and the protein requirement just stays exactly the same based on your activities level. And then, but you don't want rabbit starvation either, and you don't want rapid weight loss because you're not trying to compete, and that's unhealthy. So you bring it down to about a third, and your body composition will just sort itself out. Because as long as you don't cheat and you keep the insulin to glucagon down to 1 point something, you'll be fine. You'll lose. Even somebody on a potato diet will have an insulin to glucagon ratio of 4:1. So they'll lose weight as well. Or fruitarians have a similar, or slightly lower actually, fruitarians. It's down to about 2.5 or something like that. So they're in more, and sometimes depending on what fruit, they can be even lower, down to a low carb level of insulin to glucagon. And so they can tear down, and within a short amount of time, especially if they're energy depriving themselves, then glucagon can even go higher, the insulin to glucagon effect. So it ends up, especially on those sort of diets, like a fasting mimicking diet, because that's what veganism is. Traditional veganism, it's a fasting mimicking diet. You can't do it forever because you're going to tear yourself to, and break down your body very rapidly. So it's not healthy at all. So it depends where you are and what you're doing and what you're trying to achieve. And if you want, consider Jonathan is a good consultant in body composition stuff, and get some pointers from him. He can help you out there. Because sometimes having somebody that actually, because I don't do these sort of things, consultancies, I just don't have, as I said, I've got a day job, I don't have the time. But people like Jonathan, that's their bread and butter. And, you could consult with him a couple of times to learn some of the tricks of the trade, some of the approaches, so that's an option to look at. Anyway, guys, it's about nearly 3.5 hours that we've been streaming, and I need to be somewhere else. I've got my older sisters flown over from Melbourne, and I'm going to be over at Dad's place. So I need to have enough time to get there, spend a bit of time with them, and then come back because I've got the evening session as well. So in that regard, so I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to pull the pin on it. Just reminding people the website. Now, once I get the code, I will release that little video, and in the description, I'll write that down so people are well aware. Never, Tegan, eat the whole egg. Always eat the whole egg, not whites. Always eat the whole egg. The level of protein the bioavailability of protein from egg is pretty much 100%. So it's not going to, what you're going to be absorbing isn't that, but the utilization is very different. The utilization only from the whites can be as low as 17% for protein synthesis, while it can be up to 48%, 48% as a whole egg. It's because of the amino acid composition. The yolk also has proteins, and it has such a profile matching the whites, which gives you a higher, of the ones that can actually the balance of the essential amino acids is such where it becomes more bioavailable for protein synthesis purposes. So yeah, and raw eggs are fine. So yeah, it's not an issue. And well, there was something else I was going to. That's right. And also, to remember the percentage. What was the percentage? 27%. That's right. Also, with avidine in raw eggs, only 27% of biotin gets bound. So even in raw eggs is not an issue. So it's just that amount. So I wouldn't worry. Yes, it's very hard to actually replicate precisely in that regard. So we are pretty much, I'll go right to the end. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Absolute nonsense. I've done a whole PUFA video covering all this sort of stuff. It's trace amounts, really, and the problems, and our intracellular antioxidant systems can deal with it. It's just Saladino, more reduction is bullshit. What a crackpot. Absolutely. Definitely. See you there, Scotty. Thanks, mate. Appreciate it. And I better get the friggin' hell out of here. Anyway, see you all. See you, Lukey.